Hey everyone, welcome back to AfterMoon Horrors. Tonight, I've got some truly unsettling real-life stories that'll send shivers down your spine, just in time for sleep. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who loves a good scare. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I always love hearing from you. Thanks so much for the continued support. Now, let's get into it. Story number 1. I never liked painting in the rain. The canvas gets soggy, the colors don't behave, and the cold seeps into your hands like guilt you can't shake. But that year, in 2005, I couldn't stop. It was like something in me shifted. I'd sit by the Inn River in Innsbruck every morning, and even when the rain started falling, I'd keep going. I told myself it was inspiration. Looking back now, I know it wasn't. It started in March. I remember because the snow had just started to melt, and the river had that thick, brown current that comes with early spring. I painted a scene, the river bending past the old bridge, with a woman standing ankle-deep in the water. She wasn't from memory or reference. I didn't recognize her. I just painted. Her head tilted toward the trees, her hands hanging limp. It looked sad, but peaceful. 2 days later, the local news reported a drowning. A woman named Amelia Krantz. 42. Found in the river, near the bend where I'd painted her. I stared at the article for hours. Same hairstyle. Same jacket color. I brushed it off as a coincidence, morbid, but meaningless. Still, something gnawed at me. I stopped painting for a week. I told myself I just needed a break, and maybe I did. But then, one night I woke up, my hands itching to paint. Not metaphorically, they literally burned, fingertips tingling like they were full of static. I went down to my studio, grabbed a fresh canvas, and started again. This time I painted a man in a red hoodie, lying face down on the embankment. He was half in the water, half out. The hoodie had this tear along the shoulder, a detail so specific I don't know why I added it. He turned up 4 days later. Marcus went. 27. A university student. Drowned. The police said he might have been drunk and slipped. They didn't mention the tear in the hoodie, but when I saw the photo, it was there. Right where I painted it. After that, I stopped trying to fight it. It's hard to explain why. Maybe part of me thought I was predicting something, like a weird psychic gift. Maybe I thought if I painted faster, I could warn someone. Maybe I just didn't want to admit I had no control over it. I tried telling someone, my sister Lena. She lives in Salzburg. I sent her photos of the paintings and news clippings. She called me paranoid. You're just painting what you subconsciously pick up, she said. You probably saw them around town without realizing. I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. But then I painted a boy. Maybe 10 years old. Curly black hair, pale skin. He was in the water, but not drowning, floating. Eyes closed, arms spread out like he was asleep. There was a balloon in the background, red, tangled in a tree branch. That balloon. I remember shaking after painting it. It felt wrong. Too detailed. Too deliberate. The boy was found the next week. The balloon was real. The branch was real. His name was Niko Petrovich. His parents lived a few blocks from me. I saw them once at the market, months before. That's when I stopped trying to rationalize. I locked up my paints. Packed away the canvases. I even threw out my easel. I told myself I was done. But the dreams didn't stop. I started seeing them at night, the people. Faces I hadn't met, all drenched and silent, staring at me. Sometimes they whispered things I couldn't understand. One night I woke up with a sketch on my nightstand. I don't even remember doing it. Just a pencil outline of a woman curled up on the river rocks, her hair spread around her like a halo. I hadn't drawn in my sleep since I was a kid. So I gave in again. I painted her. She turned up that weekend. Her name was Ingrid Baumgartner. 36. Her sister spoke to the paper. Said Ingrid had struggled with depression, that the rain always made it worse. They thought it was suicide. At that point I felt sick. Like I was being used. I didn't understand why it was happening, or what I was supposed to do about it. So I tried something different. I painted someone surviving. I painted a man slipping off the rocks, but catching himself. Pulling himself up. A scar on his forehead. I waited, praying he would show up in the news as a near drowning. But nothing happened. A week passed. Then 2. And then the dreams came back, harder. The faces were angrier now. One of them, I think it was the boy, screamed at me in the dream. I woke up gasping, blood on my bedsheet. My nose had bled through the night. I hadn't had a nosebleed in years. I repainted the canvas. This time, the man didn't survive. I painted him submerged. Face down. I hated myself for it. 2 days later, Andreas Mayer. 34. A local bartender. I'd seen him around. He matched the painting exactly, even the forehead scar. I became a ghost in my own life. I stopped leaving the apartment. I lived off frozen meals. I couldn't look anyone in the eye. Every face I saw was potential. Every drop of rain filled me with dread. When clouds gathered, my stomach turned. It was in late October when I reached my breaking point. I hadn't painted in 2 weeks. The dreams were constant now. I'd wake up covered in sweat, fingers twitching like they were mid-brushstroke. One night, I blacked out. When I came to, there was a half-finished painting in front of me. A man and a woman. They were together, sitting at the riverbank, their backs to me. The man's hand rested on her shoulder. Something about it felt warm. Hopeful, even. I decided to finish it. Just once, I wanted to paint something that didn't end in death. As I worked, something shifted inside me. It didn't feel like the others. No dread. Just calm. The next day, I left my apartment for the first time in weeks. I walked along the river, searching. And there they were. The couple. Same posture. Same gesture. They were real. Alive. Smiling. I almost collapsed from relief. But that night, the dreams came back, worse than ever. The faces screamed in fury. The boy tried to claw at me. I woke up screaming, nails dug into my own arms. Blood under my fingertips. I couldn't sleep after that. I just sat in the studio, shaking. And then I realized. I hadn't painted the river in days. Maybe the connection was broken. Maybe I was free. I was wrong. A few days later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a blank canvas, and a note. 6 words, scrawled in charcoal, "You stopped." They didn't. Keep going. I stood there, staring at it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn the damn thing. But instead, I set it on the easel. My hand moved before I could stop it. The scene I painted that night wasn't the river. It was my own apartment, my studio. Me, slumped in the chair, brush still in hand. The window open, rain blowing in. A woman's silhouette standing behind me, looking down. Her face wasn't visible, but I knew who she was. She was the first. Emilia Krantz. I stared at that painting for hours. Then I tore it in half. I burned the pieces. I swore I'd never touch a brush again. That was 4 months ago. Since then, there've been no drownings. No dreams. No bleeding. No sketches. I keep waiting for the punishment, for the next painting to appear, for the faces to return. But nothing's come. I don't know what it means. Maybe the curse, or whatever it was, ended when I painted myself. Maybe I gave it closure. Or maybe I warned myself just in time. I moved away from Innsbruck last month. Changed my name. Threw away every art supply I owned. People ask why I don't paint anymore. I tell them I lost the passion. It's easier than telling them the truth, that I once painted death into being, and now I'm terrified to even pick up a pencil. But sometimes, when the rain hits just right, I still feel that itch in my fingers. And I wonder, what would happen if I painted again? Story number 2. I still remember the weight of that evening like it's stitched into my bones. It was early November 2017, and Tampere had been soaked all week. I'd stayed late on campus, not for anything noble like studying, but because I was putting off going home. My roommate and I weren't talking at the time, and the silence in the apartment was louder than any storm. The university was almost empty by the time I packed up. I lived off campus, but sometimes I'd cut through the humanities building to get to the tram stop quicker. It was a shortcut, and by now, I knew every creaky hallway and dusty stairwell. But that night, it was pouring hard, and I didn't feel like walking 3 floors down the stairs with my backpack weighing on one shoulder. I remember thinking, just take the lift. It'll be fine. Famous last words, right? The elevator was old, the kind that groaned a little when you stepped inside. I'd ridden it dozens of times and never thought twice. I pressed the ground floor button, leaned back against the wall, and felt it lurch slightly as it began its descent. Then, mid-floor, it stopped. Just like that. Total silence. The kind of silence that makes you lean in and listen, hoping to catch even the faintest hum of motion. But there was nothing. A second later, the lights blinked, then cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the space. Not dimness, darkness. I couldn't see my own hand when I raised it in front of me. The only sound was the hum in my ears and the soft pounding of rain outside, muffled through concrete. I reached for my phone, but it was dead. I had meant to charge it before I left campus but forgot. Classic me. I waited a few minutes, thinking the power would flicker back on. It didn't. I started pressing the emergency call button. No response. No buzz, no light, no recorded voice telling me help was on the way. It was like the system itself had died. I've never been claustrophobic. But something about that specific kind of darkness, in such a tight space, does something to your breathing. I felt my chest tighten, but I told myself to stay calm. Just a blackout. You'll be out in 10 minutes. I said it aloud. Hearing my own voice made it feel real. And then the lightning came. A sudden, sharp white flash cracked through the ceiling slits like an old camera flashbulb. For maybe a split second, I could see everything inside. That included the person standing directly across from me. They weren't there when the lights went out. I swear it. I had been alone. But now there was someone, tall, hair soaked down to the neck, dressed in a light jacket. The face was expressionless. What hit me first wasn't fear, it was confusion. I blinked hard, but the flash was gone and we were in the dark again. I thought, stupidly, maybe they were in here when I got in, and I just didn't see them. But that didn't make sense. I would have noticed. You feel another presence in a lift. Especially in total silence. My voice cracked as I said, "Hey, are you okay?" "Nothing." I waited. Still nothing. Then another flash. They were gone. Not just gone, gone. No shifting, no sound of movement, no breath. It was like they'd blinked out of existence. I slapped both hands against the elevator doors, calling out, hoping someone outside would hear. My voice bounced back at me. No answer. My hands were shaking now. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the lightning just cast weird reflections. Maybe my mind filled in the blanks. The darkness plays tricks on everyone, right? Then the third flash came. This time, a different person. A short man, maybe in his 50s. He stood in the opposite corner, facing me, eyes wide open, mouth slightly agape. And, this is the part one still can't explain, he wasn't standing like a person. He was slumped, but upright. Like someone had pulled strings tight to hold him in place. He didn't blink. His skin looked too still. When the light faded, the blackness rushed back like a wave. I backed into the wall, heart hammering in my throat, whispering to myself, "You're imagining it. You're tired. You're hallucinating." But it didn't feel like that. It felt external, like I was witnessing something real, even if it made no sense. I started kicking at the emergency door. My fists hit the walls. I yelled until my throat ached. Then I stopped, pressed my back against the cold steel, and slid to the floor. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to slow my breathing. I thought about calling for help again, but I already knew the intercom was dead. The next flash was longer. A girl this time. Maybe 12 or 13. Long hair braided down one shoulder. She was wet, too, like the others. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, as if in prayer. But her face was twisted. Sadness? Pain? No, fear. That's what hit me. Not fear of me, but fear of something else. Something behind me. I turned quickly, but by the time I moved, the flash was gone. I began to cry. Quiet, pathetic sobs into my sleeve. I wanted to believe this was a dream. That I'd passed out in the library or hit my head. Anything but this. But the steel beneath me was real. The cold, the smells, the tension in my jaw, everything was real. Then the pattern began. Every few minutes, lightning, a flash, a new face. Each one different. None breathing. Some standing, some sitting, some staring directly at me. Others looked away. But all of them shared one thing. They looked dead. I don't mean zombified or rotting or gory. No blood. Nothing dramatic. Just, lifeless. Like mannequins stolen from the moment before death. There was a woman in a scarf who looked like she'd been crying for hours. A teen boy with a deep scar across his chin. A bald man in a hospital gown, holding a photo. And every time, after the flash ended, I was alone again. Every single time. I don't know how long I was in there. Time became soft. My knees were numb. My mouth was dry. At one point, I started humming. Just a dumb tune from childhood, some melody I didn't even realize I remembered. It was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Then, the final flash came. I saw myself. I was standing in the opposite corner, staring back at me. Not moving. Eyes glassy. Face slack. Same clothes. Same expression I must have worn all night. My mouth opened slowly, as if to speak. And the lights came back on. Full power. Elevator humming. Buttons glowing like nothing had ever happened. I jumped to my feet and slammed the ground floor button again and again until the doors finally creaked open. I ran. Didn't stop. I must have looked insane, tearing through the halls, shoving open the building doors and sprinting into the rain like it was salvation. When I got home, I locked the door behind me, threw my backpack in the corner, and collapsed into bed. My roommate stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I told them I was stuck during the blackout, but nothing else. I didn't know how to explain what had really happened. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it had been some kind of breakdown. Stress, dehydration, exhaustion, anything rational. But then, a week later, I was in the library doing research for an assignment. I ended up in the archives section, flipping through old university yearbooks. Don't ask me why, I don't remember what I was looking for. I stopped cold when I saw a photo from 2002. A student had died after a freak elevator accident in the humanities building. His picture was small, tucked in the corner. I didn't recognize the name, but the face, it was the man from the second flash. The one standing like a puppet. I checked more. Found another article from 1996. A child had wandered into campus during a festival. Disappeared during a thunderstorm. No trace ever found. The photo was grainy, but it was her, the girl with the braid. I spent weeks trying to track them all down. Found obituaries. Memorials. Local tragedies I had never heard of. All connected to this building. All connected to storms. I never rode that elevator again. I switched buildings for most of my courses. I didn't even walk past the humanities hall after that. But sometimes, when the rain starts to pour in Tampere and thunder rolls in, I get this cold, tight feeling in my chest. Like I'm being watched. Like someone standing behind me in a space too small for two. And once, just once, I caught my own reflection in a tram window during a lightning flash. For a second, the eyes staring back weren't mine. Story number 3. They say the lake doesn't forget. That's what my grandfather used to tell me when I was young, sitting at the edge of the pier in Akureyri, watching the waters roll lazily under the soft pull of the wind. I never thought much of it back then. Just one of those things old men say to pass the time, to make the world feel more mysterious than it really is. But now, I know better. In 1981, I was 27 years old and had just taken over the ferry house from my father after he passed. The job wasn't glamorous, just a small passenger ferry that made 3 runs across the lake each day. We had maybe 15 regulars and a few tourists now and then. It was quiet work, predictable, and mostly solitary. I liked it that way. That October, it started with a storm. Nothing unusual, really. Storms are common here, especially that time of year. But this one was different. It came in heavy, fast, and sharp, and the winds didn't howl like usual, they whispered, like voices trying to be heard beneath something thicker than rain. I was sitting in the ferry house going through the passenger logs one night, marking payments, jotting down maintenance notes. The light flickered once or twice, but I didn't think anything of it. That's when I noticed something strange in the book. 3 extra names on the passenger list from the night before. Paid in full, marked clearly in my handwriting, except I didn't remember seeing them. I always remembered faces. Always. I thought maybe I'd just made a mistake. Too tired, distracted. It happens. The next night, the storm came again, heavier. Around 9:15 p.m., long after the last scheduled run, I heard the bell ring from the dock. That bell was only supposed to ring when someone wanted a late ferry, which never happened. Still, I put on my coat, stepped out, and saw them. 3 figures. All standing still on the dock. Wearing old-style coats, the kind people wore back in the 60s. One of them, a woman, had her hair done up like someone straight out of a photo album. They didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there, waiting. I felt a chill, and not from the rain. I shouted out, told them the ferry wasn't running anymore for the night. No answer. Just stood there, eyes fixed on me. It didn't feel like defiance, more like they knew I'd cave. And I did. I don't know why. Something in me said to go back, start the engine, and take them across. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that same dull sense of duty I'd inherited from my father. They boarded in silence. No thank yous, no conversation. I asked where they were headed. The man closest to me muttered something like, South Point. But there was nothing at the South Point anymore, the cabins there had been torn down years ago. The ride was quiet. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help noticing how pale they looked. Wet, but not from the rain. Damp in a way that made me think of basements. The woman's coat clung oddly to her body, heavy like wool soaked through, except I never saw her actually get wet. No drips. No footprints. Just silence. When we reached the far dock, they got off, still wordless. I turned back, uneasy, and went straight to the logbook. All 3 names were already written there. In my handwriting. And the payment, in exact change, was in the till. The next morning, I thought maybe it was a dream. Maybe I'd had one too many swigs from my father's old stash. But the money was real, and the names were there. And that day, I couldn't stop thinking about what the man had said. South Point. I went there that evening after the last run, drove down the muddy road until the tires couldn't handle it anymore. Got out and walked the rest. The cabins were long gone, but the foundations remained. I stood in the middle of a concrete slab, listening to the wind scrape through the broken trees. That's when I saw the photo. Half buried in the mud. I pulled it out and wiped it clean. 3 people. The same 3. Standing in front of one of the old cabins. On the back, Summer 1963, Elsa, Bjorn, and Carrie. That name, Carrie, sent a jolt through me. I remembered it from something my father once told me. A boating accident. 3 friends caught in a sudden storm, capsized halfway across the lake. Only one body was ever recovered. I took the photo home and kept it in a drawer. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? But they came back. Not every night. Only when it stormed. Always the same 3. Always the same destination. The same silence. The same payment, the same seats. I started dreading the rain. Then one night, after dropping them off, I lingered. I walked up the path from the dock, flashlight in hand, thinking I'd catch them walking into the trees or disappearing into some unseen cabin. But they weren't there. Nowhere. No footprints. No sound. Just gone. I turned to head back, and found one of them standing on the dock behind me. Carrie. He looked at me. His mouth didn't move, but I swear I heard the words clearly. You can stop now. I froze. I tried to speak, but my throat locked up. He walked past me, slow, steady, back onto the ferry. I got on too, not knowing what else to do. We rowed back across in silence. I didn't write their names in the log that night. I didn't take their money. The next day, I told myself I was done. No more late-night runs. No more ferrying ghosts, because that's what they were. I had to believe that. But the bell rang again that night. And again, the next. Each time, I resisted. I stayed inside. Let the bell ring itself out. And then they started showing up in other places. At first, just glimpses through the ferry house window. Reflections in the lake. Then one evening, I went to bed and woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. 3 sets. Slow. Wet. I called the church. The priest came and blessed the ferry, the house, even the photo I'd found. I burned the picture after he left. Watched the faces curl and vanish in the flames. For a while, things stopped. But a month later, I opened the logbook to find 3 names written fresh in the margin. Same handwriting. Mine. That was the breaking point. I shut the place down. I told the town I needed time off, that I was unwell. No one argued. People had always thought I was a bit odd anyway. I left Akureyri for nearly a year, stayed with my cousin down near Husavik. Worked odd jobs, kept to myself. When I finally returned, I went straight to the ferry house. It was quiet, untouched. The logs were still there, the boat just as I'd left it. But when I opened the till, there were 3 coins. Old, wet, and rusted. Not Icelandic kroner. British shillings. From the 1960s. I closed the ferry house for good that night. Today, I live in Reykjavik. I haven't been back to the lake in over 30 years. I don't speak of this often, people wouldn't believe me anyway. But every now and then, when the rain hits the windows just right, I think I hear the bell ringing. And I remember Carrie's voice. You can stop now. I did. But I don't think they ever did. Story number 4. I was 8 years old when I first heard the tapping. It was a dull, wet evening in Rouen, and the rain had been coming down for hours. The kind of endless drizzle that made the orphanage feel more like a prison than a place for children. We weren't allowed outside when it rained, so most of us spent our time in the common room, playing the same worn-out board games or just staring out the windows, hoping the clouds would break. But that night, I wasn't in the common room. I was lying in my bunk, pretending to sleep. I'd gotten in trouble earlier for fighting with Marianne over who got the last cup of hot chocolate, so they sent me to bed early. I was angry, wide awake, and wishing I were anywhere else. That's when I heard it. Tap. 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 Faint, but rhythmic. I remember sitting up in bed, my breath catching just slightly. I thought maybe it was one of the girls from the floor above me knocking something over, or maybe someone playing a prank. But the sound didn't come from above. It came from the wall behind my bed. 3 soft taps, then silence. I waited, straining my ears. Nothing. I laid back down, confused but not yet afraid. The next night, it happened again. Same pattern. Tap. 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 It was strange, but I didn't tell anyone. I figured maybe it was the old plumbing, or the rain messing with the walls somehow. But by the 3rd night, I wasn't so sure. The sound had changed. It was faster. More urgent. 5 taps now, and they weren't random, they felt like a pattern. I sat up and leaned close to the wall, pressing my ear against the cool red bricks. That's when I felt it, a tiny vibration with each tap. Someone, or something, was on the other side. The next morning, I tried asking the matron about it. I didn't mention the tapping, I just asked if anyone lived on the other side of the wall. She looked at me like I was slow. That wall backs onto the storage wing. No one goes in there. It's been closed since before you arrived. Then she walked away. Closed. Empty. But something was in there. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day. I barely ate. That night, I lay in bed with my covers pulled up to my chin, wide-eyed and waiting. Right on cue, the tap started again. This time, I didn't just listen. I tapped back. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. My heart was thudding in my chest, and I thought maybe I imagined the whole thing. Then, the reply came. 2 taps. A pause. 1 more. My throat went dry. I don't know how long I sat there frozen, staring at the wall like it might speak. The next day, I tried to sneak into the storage wing. It was locked, of course. The door was old, heavy, and rusted around the hinges. I stared at it for a few minutes, then pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. No tapping. No vibration. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye, a small crack near the base of the wall, just above the floor. Dusty, but it looked newer than the rest of the stone. As I crouched down to look closer, Marianne came around the corner and startled me. I played it off, pretended I was looking for a lost marble, and left it alone. But I knew then I had to go back. It was 3 more nights before I got my chance. I waited until the older girls were asleep and slipped out of bed, taking the tiny key I'd stolen from Matron's office. I'd seen her open the storage wing once with it, and I knew which one it was. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The air inside was thick and stale. I couldn't see much, but the moonlight helped a little. Boxes, shelves, dust. All the things you'd expect. But then I heard it, those same taps, louder now that the wall wasn't between us. They were coming from behind a shelf covered with faded tarps. I pushed it aside. Behind it was another wall, red brick, like the one behind my bed. But this one had something different. A panel, almost hidden, made of old wood nailed into the brickwork. My fingers fumbled with the edges until I found a loose corner. I pulled. The wood creaked and cracked, and eventually it gave way. Behind it was a hollow space. Maybe a meter deep. And inside, half buried in dust and cobwebs, were bones. Small ones. A child's. I stepped back so fast I nearly fell. My stomach lurched, and I had to grip the shelf to stop from screaming. But then I saw something else, an old leather notebook, half torn, lying near the skeleton's side. I took it. Back in my bed, under the covers, I opened it with shaking hands. The first few pages were water-stained, the ink barely legible. But the further I went, the clearer the words became. It was a diary. Written in looping, childish French. Her name was Lucille. Lucille had lived in the orphanage in the 1960s. Her entries started off normal, daily complaints about the food, teasing from older girls, descriptions of books she liked to read. Then, slowly, they grew darker. She wrote about being locked in the storage wing as punishment. How it happened more and more often. How she started hearing noises in the walls. The last few pages were erratic, messy. Desperation poured off the ink. She was begging someone, anyone, to hear her. The final entry was only 4 words. I don't want to die. The diary slipped from my fingers. I curled into a ball and cried until morning. I tried to tell the matron. I told her everything, about the tapping, the bones, the diary. She slapped me across the face. Told me I was sick in the head. That if I spread such lies, I'd be sent away. I think part of her was afraid I might be telling the truth. That day, I hid the diary under a loose floorboard near my bed. I didn't know what else to do. They locked the storage wing again. I never heard the taps after that. A week later, 2 men in dark suits came to the orphanage. They didn't speak to any of us children, but they spent hours behind closed doors with the matron. After they left, she looked pale and angry. That night, she called me into her office. She didn't yell this time. Just stared at me. They found remains, she said quietly. Old ones. From decades ago. They'll be taking them away. I asked her what would happen to Lucille. She said, she was forgotten. Let her rest. But I never forgot her. I kept the diary for years. Even after I was adopted and moved far from Rouen, I'd sometimes take it out and read her words. Lucille never left that room. No one looked for her. No one cared. Until me. One day, maybe 15 years later, I returned. The orphanage was long shut down. The building was crumbling, windows broken, walls tagged with graffiti. But I found my old room. The bed frame was gone, but the floorboard was still loose. I slipped the diary back into its hiding place. A week later, I sent a letter to the local paper. I told them the whole story, anonymously. Not for fame. Not for attention. I just wanted someone else to know. And maybe now, when it rains in Rouen, and the wind taps on the red brick walls, someone will remember her name. Lucille. Story number 5. I had never believed in ghost stories. Not really. I'm a historian, trained to trace facts, challenge myths, and verify everything against dates, documents, and dusty archives. My job has always been about what's provable. Which is why I've never told anyone this story in full until now. But it happened. I lived it. And there's not a single piece of paper or academic journal that could make it make sense. In the spring of 2021, I took a short-term research position in Bergen, Norway. The city's full of medieval charm and quiet corners, and I was there to study church records and architectural transitions in post-war religious buildings. One of the structures I was particularly interested in was an old Lutheran church at the edge of town, nothing famous or particularly grand, but it had a bell tower that hadn't rung in decades. The tower was tall, gray, a bit crooked at the top, and most locals just ignored it. I was told the bell hadn't sounded since the 1950s and that the mechanism was broken beyond repair. But it was structurally intact, and with my clearance, I could access it for academic purposes. My interest started out purely professional. The church archives, kept in a small adjoining hall, were remarkably well preserved. I was going through old council minutes when I first came across the name Henrik Dahl, a maintenance man who worked at the church in the early 1950s. Nothing odd about that at first. But there was a short note written in the margin of a 1953 record, Dahl gone missing. Tower last seen. That was it. No follow-up, no obituary, no resolution. It caught my eye, and I marked it for further digging. A few days later, I mentioned Dahl to the caretaker who gave me my key access to the tower. The man paused, noticeably. Old story, he said vaguely. People said he fell. Others say he left town. Either way, no one found him. His tone said, "Don't ask more." But I've never been good at leaving questions unanswered. The first time I went into the tower, it was unremarkable. Cramped spiral stairs, rusted handrail, an empty wooden platform at the top. The bell, or what was left of it, was caged in a steel frame. It no longer moved. I took photos, measured angles, wrote notes. Normal stuff. It wasn't until the third visit that something happened. It had started to rain just before I reached the top, and the tower creaked as the wood expanded with moisture. I was sitting on the platform, writing notes, when I heard it, a whisper. Not loud. Just, audible. Clear enough to recognize that it was human. I froze. I thought maybe someone had come in behind me, maybe another historian or a tourist who'd snuck past the caretaker. But when I called out, "Hello," no one responded. Then I heard it again. This time, a little louder. Still muffled, like it was coming from inside the walls or below the floor. And I recognized something impossible. It was Norwegian, but old-fashioned. The dialect was thicker, words structured differently than modern speech. I could only make out fragments, but one line stuck out, "Don't let him find out. He'll destroy everything." I wrote it down, then laughed nervously to myself. Echoes, I thought. Maybe someone outside. Sound carries weird in these towers. I tried to dismiss it. But it happened again. And again. Over the next 2 weeks, every time I visited during a storm or heavy rain, I'd hear voices. Always during the worst of the rain, and never clear enough to follow everything, but coherent. Conversational. Never the same script. I started recording them with my phone. The audio was faint, often distorted by wind and water, but there were clear phrases. Names. Dates. Arguments. And every one of them sounded like a conversation from the 1950s, about church funds, accusations, fear, and a man named Henrik. One night, desperate for clarity, I played the recordings for a colleague back at the university. He was from Oslo, older than me, and immediately noted the dialect was consistent with 1950s Bergen, not something you'd easily fake. When I told him the voices came from an empty tower during rainstorms, he became very quiet and suggested I stop going. Of course, I didn't. I started cross-referencing the names from the recordings with old parish logs. There it was, Henrik Dahl, maintenance. Lars Egelund, treasurer. Sigrid Hauke, organist. All real people. I even found a death notice for Lars in 1956, ruled a suicide. No explanation given. Sigrid disappeared the same year, no trace found. I was piecing together a puzzle no one knew existed. The real breakthrough came when I found a dusty black notebook inside the church's sealed filing cabinet, something overlooked for decades. It had Henrik's name on the first page. The contents were erratic, frantic entries. Some were about repair work. But the tone quickly shifted. Lars is taking money. Sigrid knows. She's scared. I told her we have to go to the police. The bells heard it. I can't be the only one. It's trapped in the walls. They know I saw. If I disappear, look in the tower. That was the last entry. I returned to the tower the next day, determined to find whatever he meant. The rain started just as I climbed to the top. As soon as the thunder cracked, the voices began again, only this time, they were louder than ever before. And different. They were arguing. You can't just kill him, Lars. We don't have a choice. He'll ruin everything. You said. He's in the tower now. Finish it. I swear to you, it felt like I was in the middle of it. The air was heavy with it. Not just sound, presence. I grabbed my flashlight and began knocking along the floorboards of the platform. Near the back corner, one of the boards echoed hollow. I pried it up with my penknife. Beneath it was a small compartment, no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, a crumpled set of overalls, bones, and a rusted wrench. And tucked inside the shirt pocket, a folded envelope. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even think straight. But I opened the letter. It was a confession. Lars had written it, apparently after the murder. He detailed everything. The theft, the threats, and ultimately, how they cornered Henrik in the bell tower during a storm and pushed him. They hid his body in the floor, sealed the compartment, and destroyed the bell mechanism to end access. He ended the letter with, "God forgive me. I hear him in the rain." I reported everything. The authorities came. The remains were exhumed. DNA matched distant family members. It made local news for about a week, missing man found after 70 years. Most people saw it as an interesting historical closure. An unsolved disappearance finally answered. But no one talked about the voices. I returned one final time before I left Bergen. It was raining, lightly. I stood in the bell tower and waited. Nothing happened. Then, just as I turned to leave, I heard one last voice. "Thank you." Just one word. Quiet. Peaceful. Since then, the tower's been locked permanently. They've sealed the upper access, citing safety regulations. And I've gone back to writing history the way I used to, through facts, files, dates. But now, every time I read an old record or see an unexplained name, I can't help but wonder what stories are still echoing out there, just waiting for the right storm to be heard. Story number 6. I never meant to go into that building. Honestly, I was just trying to get off the flooded street. I'd stayed late marking papers at home, and by the time I left to check on the small storage room the school had let me rent near the old grounds, the rain was already relentless. Dunedin weather can turn cruel without warning, but that night it felt different, fast and unforgiving. My car had stalled halfway down the road, water up past my ankles when I stepped out. I was already drenched, bags slipping from my shoulders. The old primary school was just ahead, closed for years now, and it was the only dry place in sight. I don't know what compelled me to go toward it. Maybe it was just muscle memory. I'd taught there for 5 years before the education board shut it down in '89. Budget cuts, declining enrollment. At the time, it had felt like a tragedy. That place had history, not just in books or dusty trophies, but in the kind of laughter that still echoes in your ears long after the bell. I remember crying the day we cleared out the last classroom. Walking into it again after 5 years, well, it didn't feel like nostalgia. It felt like crossing into something I shouldn't. The front door was surprisingly easy to push open. It wasn't locked, just swollen with age and rain. Inside, it smelled the same, old paper and linoleum. I only meant to stay until the worst of the floodwater passed. I told myself I'd wait in the old staff lounge. I even found my way there by habit, like I'd never left. I put my bag down, tried to wring out my sleeves, and sat in silence. That silence, though, it wasn't comforting. Not the way you'd expect in a place filled with memories. It was heavy. Not the quiet of a building at rest, but the kind of stillness that listens. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard the first noise. Chalk. That unmistakable sound. I knew it before I even thought about what it could mean. Chalk on a board, sharp and deliberate. Not the random tapping of rain, not wood shifting with moisture, this was writing. I froze. At first, I tried to reason with it. Maybe something fell. Maybe a rat knocked something over. But the noise didn't stop. I stood slowly and moved toward the corridor, heart pounding, steps light, as if I were sneaking up on something. The sound was coming from room 12. I hadn't thought of that room in years. It had been one of the few rooms never really cleared out. They kept it locked after the last teacher there had a breakdown. No one knew what happened exactly. She left one day and didn't come back. There were rumors, of course. That she'd started hearing voices. That she'd started seeing her own name scrawled across the blackboard in different handwriting. I'd never believed it. Until that night. Room 12's door was shut, but not locked. That struck me immediately. I reached for the handle without thinking, and it turned. Slowly, I pushed the door open, expecting dust, darkness, but what I saw sent a chill through every inch of me. The board was covered in writing. Neat, perfect lines. Over and over, in different sizes, some large and clumsy, others small and sharp. Miss Hartley. My name. Again and again. Hundreds of times. I stepped back. My instinct was to run. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring, heart in my throat. The room looked untouched otherwise. Desks in rows, faded posters on the walls. The old class list still hanging on the pinboard. But the chalkboard. I walked to it slowly, unsure why I didn't flee. Maybe I needed to prove it was real. I reached out, wiped a corner with my palm. It smudged. Chalk dust on my skin. Real. Then I noticed the chalk resting on the ledge. Still whole. Still warm. I didn't sleep. I tried to convince myself to leave, but the flood outside had worsened. I could hear the rush of water outside the broken windows, and something about it told me the streets weren't safe. So I stayed. I pulled a chair into the lounge, locked the door, and tried to wait it out. But the noises didn't stop. Footsteps in the hallway. The sound of chairs scraping in empty rooms. Once, I heard laughter, a single child's laugh, short and sharp like a hiccup. I covered my ears. I told myself it was the wind. But then the chalk started again. This time, I didn't go to look. I curled up on the lounge couch and waited. I whispered to myself like I used to do when I was little and afraid of the dark. Just until morning. Just until the rain stops. Just until daylight. But dawn never seemed to come. Around 4 a.m., I must have drifted into a shallow sleep, because I woke to something touching my hand. Not cold. Not warm. Just pressure. Like a child's hand. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. But the chalkboard, visible from the lounge through the cracked door of room 12, now had something new on it. You left us. I stood up slowly. Every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't remember writing it. I hadn't moved. But the words were fresh. I didn't even pack my things. I ran. Out the door, into the still pouring rain. The streets were half submerged, but I didn't care. I walked the 2 miles home in soaked shoes and bare fear. I locked my doors, shut the curtains, and didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. I didn't go back. I told the school board I wanted nothing else to do with the storage room. They didn't ask questions. The building was condemned shortly after, and eventually demolished. But I couldn't forget. And then, last month, over 30 years later, something arrived in the mail. No return address. Just a small envelope. Inside was a photo. Room 12, from behind the teacher's desk. The board had my name on it. Miss Hartley. New handwriting. And underneath, still waiting. I moved cities the next week. I don't teach anymore. I don't go near schools. Some nights, I still hear the chalk. Not in dreams. In the real dark silence of my flat. I don't get up to check. I just wait until the sun rises, if it does. Because now, I understand. They weren't angry. They were forgotten. Children who never left that school. Maybe they were never supposed to be there. Maybe they were trapped long before me. But I saw them. I heard them. And that means they know I know. If you ever see a building that shouldn't be open during a storm, don't go in. Even if it's familiar. Even if it once felt like home. Some doors don't close once you've walked through them. And some names, once written, never fade. Story number 7. I was 16 the first time I saw him. I had just run away from home 2 nights before and was sleeping on a bus bench in Gothenburg, wrapped in a hoodie 2 sizes too small. I wasn't from the city. I'd taken a train from a small town up north, trying to get away from what I thought was the worst thing in my life, my father's fists and my mother's silence. Turns out, I didn't know the meaning of worst back then. The rain had started just after midnight. Light at first, then pounding like a drumline. I'd pulled my hood tighter and buried my face into my knees. Then I heard the footsteps. Not fast. Just steady. Rubber soles on wet pavement. At first, I thought it was a city cleaner or some drunk stumbling home. But when I peeked over my shoulder, I saw a man in a yellow raincoat standing across the street, completely still. Facing me. Not moving. I didn't think much of it at the time. People do weird things. Especially in cities. I went back to pretending to sleep, hoping he'd walk off. The rain let up after a while, and when I looked again, he was gone. I forgot about it the next day, focused more on finding something to eat and a warm corner in the central station. Gothenburg was cold in ways my body hadn't prepared for, not just the weather, but the silence. No one looked at you. No one helped. That's how I knew I was truly alone. The second time was 4 days later. I was walking behind a kebab place near Jarntorget, where they threw out food just before closing. I'd gotten good at timing it, waiting until the workers were too tired to care. I had just reached for a bag when I saw something reflected in the restaurant's back window. Same yellow raincoat. Same height. Same stillness. But now he was just a few meters behind me. I turned quickly, nothing. Just a puddle. My stomach sank. I hadn't heard him walk. No footsteps. No splash. Just, gone. I started seeing him more often after that. Only when it rained. Always the same way, standing still, just far enough to make me question myself. Once near the tram stop, once by the bridge where I slept for a week. Once I saw him standing behind the fence of a closed-down preschool, watching from between the bars. That time, I didn't even try to pretend I was imagining it. I ran. Ran like hell. I told another street kid I'd gotten to know, Lucas. He was a couple years older and claimed he'd been sleeping rough since he was 12. I thought he'd laugh, but he just looked at me, quiet for a long time, and then said, "What color were the threads on his sleeves?" I told him I didn't know, hadn't noticed. He nodded like that was all he needed to hear and said, "Don't look back if you ever see him too close." Then he walked off. I didn't see him again after that night. Weeks passed, maybe more. Time is weird when you're not living by clocks anymore. I learned to keep moving. I slept in train stations, under overpasses, even broke into a supply shed once. But the man kept appearing. Only when it rained. Never during clear days. Never inside buildings. Always outside, always still, always just, watching. I stopped telling people. I knew how it sounded. Hell, I didn't even believe myself half the time. I thought maybe I was cracking from hunger or sleep deprivation. Maybe I wanted someone to notice me so badly, my brain invented one. Then one night it poured like the sky had ripped open. I'd found shelter in the alley behind an old warehouse. I was soaking wet, freezing, and shaking with a fever I didn't even know I had until my teeth started clacking. And that's when I saw him again. This time, just across the alley. Closer than ever before. Maybe 6 or 7 feet. He didn't move. Just stood there, rain running off the brim of his hood. I could see his boots. They were old, scuffed. His sleeves were slightly frayed, and that's when I saw it. A single yellow thread hanging from his cuff. I couldn't breathe. I scrambled backward, slipping on wet concrete, smashing my elbow against the dumpster behind me. When I looked up, he was gone. No sound. No movement. Just an empty alley. I wanted to cry, to scream, but nothing came out. I passed out right there on the ground, shaking from cold and fear. When I woke up, it was daylight. The fever was worse. I dragged myself to a nearby shelter, one I rarely used because it was always packed. But I needed warmth. Inside, the staff tried to talk to me, but I barely registered it. One volunteer, an older woman named Ingrid, sat me down with soup and told me I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I almost laughed. Almost. I stayed there for a few nights. The rain didn't come, and neither did he. I started thinking maybe it had all been in my head. Until I saw the newspaper. It was an article posted on the corkboard in the shelter's hallway. Local police had found an abandoned underground storage room near the port. The room had been sealed from the outside, probably for years. Inside, they found personal items, backpacks, jackets, old IDs. 12 in total. All belonging to people who'd gone missing over the last decade. Some homeless. Some tourists. One a local social worker. All declared missing during rainy nights. Each item had a yellow thread sewn into it. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stood there, staring at the article, my mind racing. Was this real? Could he be connected? Was I next? I went back to the spot where I'd seen him last. I don't know why. Maybe part of me thought I'd find a clue. Maybe I wanted to face him, to get it over with. The alley was empty. Dry. But something compelled me to walk further, toward the harbor. There, behind a rusted gate and a line of containers, I found a narrow stairwell that led underground. No signs. No lights. I didn't want to go down. But I did. Every step felt heavier. At the bottom, a door, cracked open. Inside, dark, damp, reeking of rot and mold. I turned on the flashlight from a cracked phone I'd picked up weeks ago. There were old tarps. Ropes. And in the far corner, a pile of worn clothes. Jackets. Shoes. Bags. I recognized one, it had a patch I'd seen Lucas wear. My breath caught in my throat. That's when I heard it, not footsteps, but water dripping. Slow. Then quicker. And then, nothing. Silence. I turned to run, but he was there. At the top of the stairs. Closer than ever. I couldn't see his face, just the raincoat, soaked and glistening under the weak flashlight. My body froze. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. I backed into the room again, trying to find something, anything. My foot slipped on a loose tile, and I went down hard. The flashlight spun out of my hand. The light landed on the wall, and that's when I saw them, markings. Names. Dates. Etched into the concrete. Lucas' name was there. Along with 11 others. All with the same date next to them, the day after they were last seen. The flashlight flickered. I grabbed it and turned back toward the stairs. He was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't go back to the shelter. I sat under an awning, soaked, trembling. Morning came. I walked straight to the police station. Told them everything. They didn't believe me at first. Not until I showed them the underground room. The names. The belongings. They launched a full investigation. The official story said it was the work of a serial killer. Someone who used the rain as cover. Who preyed on the unseen. The forgotten. The case made national news. They found DNA from some of the victims. But never a suspect. No fingerprints. No fibers. Nothing that pointed to who did it. I never saw the man in the yellow raincoat again. I've been clean for years now. Have a job. A small flat. I don't talk much about those days. People think the trauma made me see things. Maybe they're right. But every time it rains, I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder. Not because I'm afraid he's coming for me. But because I don't understand why he didn't. Story number 8. It was supposed to be a short drive. Just a 2-hour ride from my in-laws' place back to our home in Whitby. My daughter, Alina, had just turned 6, and we'd spent the weekend up in Peterborough, celebrating with her grandparents. I didn't want to drive back late, but it was Sunday evening, and I had work the next morning. My wife had stayed behind for a few extra days, so it was just me and Alina, and honestly, the drive started off fine. I don't even remember when the rain started. It wasn't sudden or loud. One moment the roads were dry, and the next, I was squinting through the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. Alina had dozed off in the back seat, clutching the stuffed raccoon her grandma had given her, and I was half listening to some late-night FM talk show. At some point, I must have missed the highway turnoff. The signs were harder to see in the rain, and Google Maps kept recalculating. I wasn't too worried, there's always another route. But after 20 minutes of driving through unfamiliar roads, I realized I hadn't seen another car in a while. That's when I saw the gas station. It was old, probably independent, with a faded green awning and a flickering sign that just said, "Open." I pulled in to check directions and maybe grab a snack for Alina. The place was dimly lit, but the door was unlocked. No one was behind the counter, but the cash register glowed green, and the refrigerator humming in the back told me the place still had power. I waited a bit, then called out. "Hello." No answer. I didn't want to leave Alina alone in the car too long, so I left without buying anything. Back on the road, I followed what looked like a detour sign, though it was oddly placed, almost leaning into the ditch. 10 minutes later, I passed the gas station again. I actually laughed. I figured I'd circled around somehow. My GPS was still searching for signal, so I took another turn, thinking it would lead me back to the main road. But then, I passed the gas station a third time. I started to feel something strange in my chest. That pressure you get when you realize you're in over your head. I turned around completely and backtracked. But 30 minutes later, there it was again, the green awning, the flickering, "Open" sign, and the same puddle under the left gas pump. Alina had woken up by then. "Daddy, didn't we stop here already?" "Yeah, sweetie. GPS is just being weird," I said, trying to sound calm. But inside, I was starting to panic. I called my wife. The call didn't go through. I tried again. Nothing. Then I opened Google Maps and it finally loaded, but all it showed was a blue dot, alone in gray. I decided to go back to the gas station one last time. I pulled in, left the car running, and stepped inside. The place hadn't changed. Still empty, still humming. This time, I walked behind the counter. There were dusty lottery tickets, old receipts, a newspaper, dated June 2002. I froze. I picked it up. The pages were yellowed, but dry. That's when I noticed the wall behind the counter. Faint, but there, it looked like smoke stains. Like fire damage that had been half scrubbed away. I walked into the back storage room. Empty shelves. Then, a metal door. It had a black mark running across it, almost like soot. Something told me not to open that door. I didn't. When I came back outside, Alina was staring at something through the rear window. I opened the door. "What are you looking at?" She didn't answer right away. "There was someone, standing there," she said, pointing toward the road. "There's no one there, Alina." He was wet. He had no shoes. I didn't ask more. I got her buckled in, turned the car around, and drove faster this time. I kept the GPS off. I told myself I'd follow the power lines. I told myself anything to stay sane. But half an hour later, I passed the gas station again. I slammed the brakes and screamed into the steering wheel. I couldn't understand it. I wasn't turning in circles. I wasn't dreaming. My phone was dead by now. The rain hadn't stopped, and every part of my brain screamed that something was wrong, like the world was folding in on itself. I parked the car again. I left the headlights on and told Alina not to move or unlock the doors. This time, I didn't go into the gas station. I walked around it. There was nothing behind the building, just trees, mud, and a shallow ditch. But to the right of the building, I noticed something. The ground was black. Charred. Like it had been burned. I crouched down and touched the soil. It crumbled like ash. That's when I saw it. The stone foundation beneath the gas station was cracked in places. And through one of those cracks, I could see burned beams. I pressed my face closer and looked in. There were stairs. Stone stairs, leading down into darkness. I heard something behind me, like a soft shuffle. I turned fast. No one. And yet, I felt watched. I didn't go down the stairs. I couldn't. But I saw enough. I saw the outline of something metallic, twisted, melted shelves, maybe. And just for a second, I thought I saw a face staring back up at me from the shadows. A small face. A child's face. I ran back to the car. Alina was crying now. I pulled her into the front seat with me and locked the doors. "Daddy," she whispered, "why is that man standing in the rain?" My heart nearly stopped. I turned my head. There was someone standing by the gas pump. Not moving. Soaking wet. He didn't have shoes. His face was hard to see in the rain, but I remember his posture. Like he'd been there for a very long time. I turned the engine. It didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I didn't look back outside. I held Alina's hand and said, "It's okay. It's going to be okay." "Daddy," she whispered, "I think he's sad." That broke something in me. I turned to look again. He was closer now, right at the edge of the hood. His head tilted slightly, not menacing, just vacant. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him to leave us alone. But I couldn't move. And then, he just walked away. He turned and walked back toward the gas station. And as he reached the door, it opened, not with his hand, but on its own. He stepped inside. And the lights turned off. All of them. The gas station went completely dark. The engine started on its own. I didn't question it. I slammed it into reverse and peeled out of that lot so fast I nearly hit the ditch. I kept driving. I didn't look at any signs. I didn't check any GPS. I just drove. 40 minutes later, I saw a Tim Hortons. Bright. Full of people. I pulled in, shaking, and sat there with Alina until I was calm enough to walk inside. I asked the cashier where I was. Whitby, she said, just off Highway 401. It made no sense. I didn't even remember merging onto the 401. I didn't remember any ramps or highway signs or exits. I just remember driving. Back at home, I started searching online. Looking up old gas stations near Oshawa. I found an article from 2002. A family-owned gas station had caught fire after a lightning strike. The owner and his 2 children died inside. The place had never been rebuilt. The land had been left untouched since the accident. The photo in the article showed the owner. He was barefoot. Wearing the same jacket as the man I saw that night. I don't know how we got out. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone down those stairs. I don't know what Alina really saw. But she still remembers it. She still sometimes asks about the wet man who was sad. I just tell her he's gone now. But I haven't taken that road again. And I never will. Story number 9. I had lived alone in my small house on the edge of Bryansk for nearly 8 years when it happened. The house belonged to my late mother, and after her passing, I moved in without much thought. It was old, modest, and quiet, everything I needed after retiring early from my job at the local library. I wasn't particularly sociable, never had been. Books were easier than people. The neighborhood had changed over the years, grown quieter too, but I never minded the silence. That night started like many others. It was raining, heavily. I remember because I had left the window in the kitchen slightly cracked, and the drops were tapping against the frame like impatient fingers. I was reading at the table with a cup of tea, wrapped in an old shawl, when I heard it, a single, sharp ring of a bell. Not a doorbell, not a phone. A church bell. One clear, deep toll that echoed through the rain. I froze. There hadn't been a church bell in this part of Bryansk for decades. The old bell tower, just a few blocks away, had been decommissioned in the early 90s. The bell itself was removed. I remembered it vividly because the whole neighborhood had talked about it. Some bureaucratic reason, safety concerns. It had been silent ever since. I tried to tell myself it was the rain playing tricks, or perhaps the television from a neighbor's window echoing off the wet pavement. But the sound was too clear. Too specific. I felt it in my chest, the way you feel a real bell. I stood up slowly and went to the living room window. Nothing. Just the slick, empty street. No people, no lights, not even the stray cat that usually lingered by my trash bin. I didn't sleep well that night. Every small creak and groan in the house seemed louder, sharper. By morning, I convinced myself it had just been my imagination, perhaps stirred by loneliness or the weather. But I couldn't quite shake the unease. The bell had sounded real. The following evening, the rain came again, earlier this time. I tried to busy myself, sweeping, folding laundry, cleaning out the fridge. But part of me was waiting, listening. When the bell rang again, it was no less shocking. A single toll, louder than before, closer. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at nothing, my hands wet from washing dishes. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. And then I noticed the footprints. Small, muddy, wet footprints leading from the front door into the hallway. My door was locked. I hadn't left. There was no broken glass, no sound of someone entering. But the prints were there, child-sized, spaced like someone walking slowly, barefoot. I followed them. They stopped right in front of the guest room, the one I never used. It had been my mother's room before she got sick. I hadn't changed a thing in there, out of some strange respect or avoidance. I stood outside that door for a long time, staring at it. Finally, I opened it. Nothing. No child, no intruder. But the room smelled faintly of damp soil. The kind you find in a forest after a storm. The curtains were still drawn tight, and everything looked undisturbed. I backed away and closed the door, locking it from the outside. I should have called someone then. But what would I say? That a ghost child rang a dead bell and walked barefoot through my house. I told myself again that I had imagined it. That the prints were from yesterday, that maybe I hadn't locked the door as tightly as I thought. I even went so far as to mop the hallway and light a candle, hoping to chase away the irrational fear curling in my gut. The third night, it rained harder than ever. I went to bed early, trying to outsleep whatever madness had taken root in the house. But I woke around 2:30 a.m. to a thump. Not loud, but deliberate. A thump and a scrape, like something being dragged lightly over wood. I got up, heart already racing, and tiptoed into the hallway. The footprints were back. More this time. 3 sets, it looked like. All small, all wet, leading to the same door. My mother's room. This time, the door was ajar. I didn't want to go in. Every instinct screamed against it. But I had to. I needed this to end. I pushed the door open slowly and turned on the light. The bed was made, just as I had left it. But now, on the pillow, lay 3 old newspaper clippings. They weren't mine. They were yellowed, curled at the corners, and I recognized the headlines immediately. 3 children missing from Bryansk suburb. No clues in 1987 child disappearance. Parents plead for help as search continues. I stared at the articles, mouth dry, lungs barely working. I remembered these stories. I was in my early 20s when it happened. The children had disappeared over 3 consecutive rainy nights. One from the market square, one from the train station, and one from a street not far from my home. They were never found. Something occurred to me then, something I had buried in memory. On the night the 3rd child vanished, I'd heard the bell ring. A single toll. And that was the last time I ever heard it. Until now. I picked up the articles and scanned the photos. My stomach turned. The footprints, the size matched perfectly. The drag marks in the hull. One child had a leg deformity, I now remembered reading. It had been mentioned briefly. Her right foot had been slightly turned in. I sat down, trying to piece it together. The bell, the rain, the children. Had they come here? Was this house connected somehow? I had no children. Never did. My mother had lived here since the early 80s. She'd always kept to herself, as I did. I searched the attic the next day, determined to find some connection. Something to make sense of this. I found nothing but old books, dusty linens, and a few of my mother's journals. Most were mundane, grocery lists, weather notes. But one entry caught my eye. Dated November 3, 1987. The night after the last child vanished. The bell rang again. I saw them this time. Three little shadows at the gate. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I don't know what they want, but they keep coming when it rains. I'm afraid if I let them in, they'll never leave. I read that passage at least a dozen times. My mother had seen them. She had heard the bell. And she had done nothing. I returned the journals to the attic, trying to keep myself composed. That night, I didn't wait. I sat in the hallway with the door open, lights off, rain falling outside in sheets. The bell rang, just once, louder than ever. And then the footsteps began. Soft, slow, deliberate. They came into view from the front door, three small figures, soaked, heads bowed. I didn't scream. I didn't move. They stopped in front of me. One raised her head. She looked no older than 6. Her eyes were wide, empty, yet pleading. "We're cold," she whispered. "What do you want?" I asked, voice shaking. "Home," said another. "You have to ring the bell for us. Ring it once." "I don't have a bell," I replied. "There's nothing here." The girl stepped forward, closer than I wanted her to. She reached into the pocket of her drenched dress and pulled out a small, rusted handbell. "You do now." I took it. It was ice cold, heavier than it looked. I stood up slowly and asked, "Where do I ring it?" All three pointed to the guest room. I walked in, bell in hand, and stood at the foot of the bed. They followed but didn't enter. I raised the bell and rang it once. The sound was deafening. Not loud, but deep. It didn't echo in the house, it echoed in my chest, in my bones. The children stood perfectly still. Then, one by one, they smiled faintly and turned toward the door. They walked out, into the hall, toward the front of the house. I followed, but by the time I reached the door, they were gone. I stood there for a long time, unsure of what had just happened. The rain began to lighten. I locked the door and went back to bed, the bell still in my hand. That was 3 years ago. I haven't heard the bell since. The guest room feels empty now, not heavy like before. I still keep the bell, wrapped in cloth, in the top drawer of my bedside table. Sometimes, when it rains, I still listen for the sound. But deep down, I think I helped them go where they needed. And I think my mother, she just couldn't do it. But I could. Story number 10. I've driven a taxi in Rosario since I was 21. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills. You meet people, hear strange stories, and once in a while, something sticks with you. Most of it fades, drunks, awkward silences, loud phone calls, but there's one night I'll never forget. I've never told anyone the whole thing before. Not like this. Because honestly, I didn't want to believe it myself. It was in 2002. I remember because that year had been hard. My wife had just left me, I was working extra shifts, and I'd switched to the night rotation for a while. Fewer fares, but better tips. That night, it was raining, the kind of rain that makes the city feel heavier, like everything soaked in silence. I was parked under an overhang near a local pharmacy when the call came through. Pickup request from a residential block a few kilometers west. When I pulled up, 3 people were waiting, 2 men and a woman. They were young, maybe mid-20s. All dressed sharp. The woman wore heels, and one of the men had that casual suit look, like someone who didn't wear a tie because he thought it was cool. They piled into the back seat, laughing about something. I smiled through the rear view, adjusted my mirror. "Where to?" I asked. "Downtown. By the old theater," one of them replied. I didn't think much of it. They kept talking to each other, occasionally including me in the conversation. Light stuff. Football. Local politics. Nothing weird. Except, there was a moment, maybe 10 minutes into the ride, when I heard the woman whisper something I couldn't quite catch. It was soft, but it didn't sound like Spanish. It wasn't the tone that threw me. It was the silence that followed. The two men didn't say anything. They just looked at her. One of them adjusted his collar. She looked out the window. I didn't think about it much at the time. People are strange, right? They say things, they change moods. Maybe they were high or coming down from something. I kept driving. When we got near the old theater, they asked me to drop them at a side street. I stopped, turned to give them their total, and only the woman responded. She handed me a folded bill. "Keep the change," she said. The men didn't look at me. They just got out, quick and quiet. The woman lingered for a second, then followed. No goodbyes. Just slammed doors. I watched them walk toward the alley between two shuttered shops. I thought it was odd, why go that way? But people have their business. I drove off. No big deal. Another fare. It was only when I checked the dashcam the next day that everything began to unravel. I reviewed my footage every couple of days. It helped in case of disputes, and I'd recently installed a newer camera that gave a clearer view of the cabin. That morning, I was half watching, sipping coffee, when I noticed something off. At the start of the footage, when the three got in, there was a clear view of them entering. One by one. But there were 4 doors that opened. 4 doors. I paused the video. Rewound. Watched again. The rear left, rear right, and front passenger doors opened. Then a moment later, the rear middle door clicked open too. But no one stepped into view. Nothing filled that seat. Nothing moved. I kept watching, my hands sweating a little. During the ride, the cabin view showed the 3 passengers talking, laughing, but between them, in the middle of the back seat, there was something. A dark shape. It wasn't a shadow. It didn't have definition, not like the others. Just a blur. A sort of distortion, like the camera couldn't focus on that space. The passengers didn't seem to react. They looked around it, through it, as if it wasn't there. At one point, the woman's eyes met the camera. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her lips moved, slowly, as if speaking directly into the lens. I turned the volume up, leaned in. Static. Then, something else, a whisper. "He doesn't see it. I swear to you," those were her words. I paused the video again. My chest was pounding. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was audio corruption. Maybe the camera glitched. Maybe I was tired, hallucinating. But my gut told me something else. Something I didn't want to name. I skipped to the end of the footage. When they got out, 3 doors opened again. The 2 men, then the woman. But that 4th door never opened. The middle rear passenger, whoever, whatever, it was, never left. That shape, it stayed in the back seat. I jumped up from my chair. Ran to the car. I don't know what I expected to find, blood, a smell, a cold seat. There was nothing. Just silence. But I didn't drive the car that day. I took the bus. That evening, I went to a mechanic friend of mine, told him I thought the camera might be malfunctioning. He agreed to take a look. He's the skeptical type, logical, grounded, the kind who doesn't believe in ghosts or anything beyond engines and gears. He called me that night, confused. Said the camera was fine. No errors in the file. But that footage, he said, trailing off. You sure you only picked up 3 people? I'm sure. Silence. Then I don't know, Hermano. But I'd get that car blessed. I laughed, nervous. But the laugh didn't stick. I avoided night shifts for a while after that. I couldn't look in the rearview mirror for too long. And every time it rained, I felt it again, that presence. Like something had stayed. Followed. Or maybe never left. It was 2 weeks later when I got curious. I couldn't let it go. So I went back to that alley, during the day. I parked a block away, walked down the narrow street. Trash bins. Peeling posters. The old theater looming behind rusted gates. Nothing unusual, until I noticed the wall. On the right side, near the alley's end, someone had spray-painted a list of names. 6 names, actually. All first names. One of them matched the woman who'd paid me that night, Camila. Below the list, in smaller letters, someone had written, Desaparecidos, 1998. Disappeared. I went to the municipal records office the next day. Pulled up any reports I could find. In 1998, 6 young people, 3 men and 3 women, vanished after a night out. All from Rosario. Last seen near the old theater. There were no leads. No arrests. Just a newspaper article with a grainy photo of the group. I stared at it for minutes. It was them. The 3 who'd gotten in my cab that night. Their faces frozen in time. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know why they came that night, or how. But I know they were already gone. And I know that the 4th passenger, whatever it was, wasn't one of them. I've thought about that a lot since. Who, or what, was in the middle seat? Something that followed them? Took them? Is still taking others? I eventually sold the car. Couldn't keep it. I never told the buyer what I'd seen. Would you? Sometimes, I still check online forums, old newspaper archives. Just to see if anyone else has had a similar experience. So far, nothing. Maybe I'm the only one who saw them. Maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe, I was meant to see it. I don't drive nights anymore. Haven't in years. But every so often, when the rain starts to fall, and I catch a glimpse in the mirror, I feel that same chill. Like someone, or something, is still sitting quietly in the back seat. Waiting. And this time, it's not leaving. Story number 11. I never thought I'd speak of this again, but I'm too old now to care what people believe. Maybe if I tell it plain, someone will understand what I saw, what I did. I was living alone in Inverary in 1996, in a modest stone cottage that had once belonged to my mother. It sat near the edge of town, close enough to the lock for the wind to reach me when the weather turned, but far enough from the village that no one bothered with me unless they had a reason. I'd been widowed 6 years by then. My husband, Alistair, passed from a quiet heart attack in his chair, not a sound, not a sign. We had no children. No siblings left, either. I was truly alone, and I didn't mind the quiet, not at first. I spent my days tending to the garden and my evenings knitting by the fire, radio humming softly in the background. It was uneventful, which was what I wanted. Until the night I saw the girl. It was the 3rd of November, I'll never forget that date. Rain was coming down hard enough to blur the window glass, and I had just made a cup of tea. I was halfway through my book when something pulled my attention to the window. Not a noise, exactly. More like a weight in the air that made the silence press differently. And there she was. A young girl, maybe 10 or 11, standing by the gate. Pale dress clinging to her, dark curls wet and stuck to her face. She was looking straight at me. I didn't move at first. Just stared. My first thought was that she was lost or in trouble. I stood and went to the door, unlocked it, stepped out. The wind slapped me hard, and the rain was cold, but she wasn't there anymore. Not by the gate, not on the road, nowhere. I walked around the house, checked the back garden. Nothing. I went back inside, wet and baffled, my tea now cold. I tried to write it off, maybe I imagined it, or maybe a neighbor's kid ran off fast. But I knew what I saw. And it didn't sit right with me. The next morning, I asked around. Went to the bakery, the post office. Asked Mrs. Devlin across the road if she'd had any children come by. Nobody had. In fact, she looked at me like I was asking if the Queen had dropped in for lunch. I tried to let it go. But I saw her again the next year. Same date, same time. I had almost forgotten, or at least convinced myself I had. Then I looked up from my knitting, and there she was, same dress, same hair, staring through the gate. I was quicker this time, bolted to the door, called out to her as I stepped outside. "Do you need help? Are you all right?" I shouted into the dark. But just like the year before, she was gone. No trace. Not even a footprint in the mud. I didn't sleep well that night. The third year, I didn't wait for her. I stayed up on purpose, coat at the ready, determined to get to the bottom of it. I didn't even blink. And sure enough, she came. Rain pounding down as always, and there she was, standing motionless. This time, I opened the door slowly, stepped out, and called to her gently. "Lass, are you real?" She turned her head slightly, and I swear she almost smiled. Not kindly. Not cruelly either. Just a knowing sort of smile. She turned and walked up the path behind the house, straight toward the woods that ran behind the old cemetery. I followed. I didn't think twice, didn't even bring a torch. I don't know what came over me, but I followed without fear. She never looked back. Just walked slowly, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the rain. She stopped by a cluster of old stones, half-buried, forgotten graves that hadn't seen flowers in decades. Then she vanished. One blink and she was gone. What remained, though, was a gravestone I'd never noticed before. Covered in moss and almost flat against the ground. I knelt and brushed it off with my sleeve. My breath caught. Eliza McCrae, 1886 to 1897. McCrae was my mother's maiden name. I never heard her speak of anyone named Eliza. I stared at that stone until my knees ached. The girl I'd seen, she looked like my mother when she was a child, at least from the few photographs I had. The resemblance was uncanny. I went home soaked, shoes caked in mud, heart thumping with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite grief. The next day, I went into town to ask questions. I spoke to the local historian, an older man named Hugh who had spent decades cataloging the town's records. I told him what I found. He pulled out a dusty ledger from a cabinet in the church hall. There was indeed an Eliza McCrae listed. Died from drowning at age 11. Fell into the loch, they said. Her body was recovered days later. The tragedy had apparently shaken the family so deeply that they moved soon after. There was no mention of any relatives still in town, and no records tying her to my direct family line. But I knew. I knew in my gut she was family. Maybe a great-aunt. Maybe even something closer. My mother never spoke of siblings, but she was a quiet woman, kept much to herself. After that, I expected the girl to stop appearing. I thought maybe following her, discovering her grave, had ended it. But she came again the next year. And the next. Always the same night. She never entered the house, never spoke, never even got closer than the gate. Just watched. Like she was waiting for something. One year, I think it was 2002, I decided to speak to her again. Not shout, just talk. I opened the door and stood under the porch. "I know who you are, Eliza," I said. "You can come in, if you want. I'm not afraid." She didn't move. But her eyes softened. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, just as before, she walked toward the woods. That night, I followed her again. We passed the cemetery this time, and kept walking into the thicket. My boots sloshed in the muck, branches caught my coat. I nearly turned back. But I kept following. We reached a clearing I had never seen before. There was nothing there, no stone, no marker, no building. Just a patch of earth, churned and dark. She stopped and looked down. Then she pointed. Slowly, deliberately. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to dig. I didn't do it that night. I couldn't. I was 71, and I had no shovel, and the rain was drowning everything. But I returned the next day, sunlight peeking through as I carried a spade and a thermos of tea. I marked the spot and began digging. I only went down 2 feet before I hit something hard. It wasn't a coffin. Just a small wooden box, rotted and damp. Inside was a child's doll, old-fashioned, handmade. And beneath it, a stack of letters tied with ribbon, blackened and nearly illegible from water damage. I lifted them out carefully, brought them home, laid them out to dry. What little I could read told me more than I wanted to know. The letters were from my great-grandmother. Written to a daughter named Eliza. Apology after apology, begging forgiveness. There were mentions of locking her away, silencing her fits, and not letting the neighbors know. It was clear Eliza had suffered from seizures, what they would have called madness in those days. The family had hidden her, out of shame. Treated her like an embarrassment. One letter, the last in the bundle, chilled me the most. "I'm sorry for what I did near the lock. I couldn't bear the whispers anymore. I pray your soul forgives me, child." She hadn't fallen in. She was pushed. I reported what I found to the authorities, quietly. They didn't press much, no one really wanted to exhume a 100-year-old crime. The police logged it as historic domestic mistreatment, but there were no charges left to lay. Everyone involved had long passed. After that, Eliza never came again. November 3rd came and went in silence. I sat by the window for hours, every year, just in case. But the gate stayed empty. I suppose she just needed someone to remember her the right way. Someone from the family to see her, follow her, name her. To not be afraid of her. I still think about her. Especially now that I'm nearing the end myself. I wonder if she knows I tried. If she forgave us all. I hope so. Because I forgave her. For coming back. For watching me all those nights. For pulling me into her story. She wasn't haunting me. She was asking me to listen. Story number 12. I was stationed in Herat in 2015, working with a small international aid organization focused on maternal healthcare. Most of my days were filled with administrative duties, helping local clinics rebuild services and coordinating supplies for displaced families. I had been there for 8 months when something happened that I've never been able to fully make sense of, something I never talk about openly. But it stayed with me, and I feel like telling it now, not because I need sympathy or attention, but because it's real. It happened to me. It was during a particularly heavy monsoon period. The main roads were muddy and barely navigable, but we were used to that. What wasn't normal was the sound I heard that night, a faint but clear baby's cry. It was past midnight. I was staying in a guest room at our central office building, trying to sleep. At first, I thought it was my imagination or maybe a neighbor's child. But the crying was too persistent, too rhythmic. It would start, then stop, then start again. Not like a baby wanting attention, more like a baby in pain. I listened for a few minutes, frozen, debating whether I was dreaming. But then I realized the sound wasn't coming from any neighboring building. It seemed to echo from the north wall, toward the direction of the old maternity hospital. Everyone in our office knew about the place. The old Herat maternity ward had been shut down for decades, ever since the Soviet invasion. It was damaged in the fighting and never repaired. Some of the older Afghan staff avoided even talking about it. There were rumors, as there always are in places like this, of nurses who went missing, babies born but never recorded, and rooms locked for years. That night, against every instinct, I decided to go check it out. I don't know what compelled me. Maybe it was just the unnatural consistency of the crying. It didn't fade. It didn't move. It didn't change pitch. That struck me as wrong, like it wasn't really a cry in the way babies cry, more like a recording, but impossibly vivid. I put on my coat and boots and made my way out. The rain was coming down hard, but I didn't have to go far. The old maternity hospital was only a 6-minute walk through a side path. It was fenced off, but the gate had been broken for years. I stepped inside the crumbling structure and immediately noticed the stillness, not silence, just stillness. Like even the wind refused to touch this place. The interior was dark, and I had only a small flashlight. Water dripped steadily from broken ceiling panels. I walked slowly, scanning the floor and walls. The crying continued, I could hear it more clearly now. It was coming from the east wing, where the birthing rooms used to be. I followed the sound, heart pounding in my ears, until I reached a rusted metal door that was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, not decay exactly, more like old rot and damp cloth. The room was empty. Nothing but a broken crib in the corner and a stack of records on a shelf. And yet the crying was right there, like the child was inside the walls. I looked around, shining my light into every corner. Nothing. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But the crying continued without pause or response. I moved toward the shelf. The files were soggy, but intact. They looked like birth records. Handwritten, mostly in Dari, but some names had been marked in English for translation purposes. One record caught my attention, the page had red ink smudged across the top. Baby number 472 date, March 11, 1984 mother, unknown outcome, stillbirth. I flipped to the next page. Another stillbirth. And the next. And the next. 12 entries in a row, all stillbirths. Same date. Same room. No surviving mothers listed. I kept flipping through, something deep in my chest tightening. It wasn't just the tragedy. It was the way the records were organized, cold, methodical, uncaring. Like someone had recorded these deaths not out of duty, but obsession. There were notes in the margins, faded but legible, subject unresponsive, no vocalization, test repeated, failed result. I dropped the folder. I didn't want to read anymore. The crying suddenly stopped. My ears rang in the absence of the sound, like my brain didn't know how to process the silence. Then I heard something else, not a cry, but a whisper. Why didn't they stop it? I froze. The voice came from behind me. I turned quickly, sweeping the flashlight. Nothing. The room was empty. I backed toward the hallway, every muscle tensed. Then something caught my eye, a small handprint on the inside of the door I had just walked through. A tiny, wet handprint. Fresh. I ran. I didn't care what I had seen or what it meant. I just ran. Back through the halls, out into the storm, down the muddy path to the office. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I told one of our senior Afghan staff about what I'd found, not the handprint or the whisper, just the records. She didn't look surprised. In fact, she looked tired. After a long silence, she told me the story that had been kept quiet. During the Soviet occupation, the hospital had been used for more than just childbirth. Certain medical procedures were performed, experiments, forced births, testing of sedatives on pregnant women. Most of the records were destroyed when the Soviets retreated, but a few documents survived in sealed rooms, like the one I found. The babies weren't stillborn, she said. They were silenced. She told me the name of the Russian doctor who ran the unit. He fled the country in 1985, never prosecuted. She even showed me a blurry photo of him in an old folder. I left Herat 3 weeks later. Not because of that night, or at least that's what I told myself. But I haven't worked in the field since. I tried to return to normal life, but something stayed with me. I would still hear the cry sometimes, especially in the early mornings, always faint, always distant. Last year, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single item, a copy of the record I had found. Baby number 472. But this one had something extra written on it. The child was quiet. Until the visitor came. That handwriting wasn't Soviet. It was English. It was mine. Story number 13. It started on a Thursday. I remember because I was supposed to be home in Cluj by the weekend for my cousin's engagement party, but instead I stayed in Targa Mures for what I thought would be a quick side excavation. I'd been contacted by a local historian who claimed there were tunnels beneath the old Franciscan monastery that hadn't been properly explored. He wasn't the first to say something like that, and normally I wouldn't have paid attention. But he had something else, a page from a ledger dated 1462 with hand-drawn symbols and a reference to the silent tombs beneath the bones of the faithful. The historian, Petru, was eccentric but smart. He met me in a small cafe near Piazza Trandafirolor, pulling out that crumpled page with a sort of reverence. The sketches on it looked like burial markings but weren't any Christian symbols I recognized. I didn't believe in the occult, but I had an academic curiosity for patterns, especially the kind no one else could categorize. He said the page came from a locked section of the town library, one that hadn't been accessed in decades. By nightfall, we were standing inside the basement of the monastery. Petru had special permission to be there after hours. The rain had already started. I remember it more for the sound than the feel, consistent, steady, like an old metronome that had no intention of stopping. We found the entrance behind a collapsed wine shelf. The bricks were already broken down, like someone had been working at it years before. We had to crawl through the narrow hole it opened into. I led, holding the flashlight between my teeth. The tunnel was surprisingly dry at first, even with the rain. Dust caked the ground, and there were cobwebs like cotton in the corners, but it didn't smell like rot, more like earth that hadn't been touched in centuries. About 30 meters in, we found the first pattern. Bones, deliberately arranged, not in the way you'd expect from a burial. This wasn't a grave. It was a design. 3 femurs formed a triangle, with a small pile of teeth at the center. I crouched and stared at it, the beam of my light catching something just beneath one of the bones, a strip of dark cloth, ancient but preserved in a way that suggested it hadn't decayed naturally. "This one matches the drawing," Petru said, holding up the page. He looked excited, but I felt something else, tension in my chest, not quite fear yet, but something sharp. The symbols were too clean, the arrangement too precise. No animal would do this. No collapse of bodies over time would create these forms. This was intentional. We went deeper. The tunnel split twice, both times we took the right path. Each time, we found another formation. Bones again, always human, always arranged. One looked like a starburst made from ribs. Another used skulls, 5 of them, in a circle, each jaw cracked open, facing inward. Petru was muttering to himself at this point, taking photos, scribbling notes. I was the one carrying the pack with extra batteries and a sealed envelope with a copy of the ledger page. I hadn't told him, but I'd gotten it translated by a friend before we even came here. The translation didn't just talk about burial. It talked about holding the gate closed and aligning the bones in the eyes of the old watchers. I didn't know what to make of it then. It sounded like religious hysteria, common in 15th century texts. But looking at those designs in person, knowing no one had stepped in this place for hundreds of years, something about the language felt more literal. We should have turned back after the third chamber, but Petru insisted on continuing. The air was getting colder, finally starting to match the sound of the rain outside. It echoed strangely now, like it was coming from above and below us at the same time. At one point, Petru stopped speaking altogether. We entered a narrow hall with hand-etched carvings along both walls. They looked like faces, elongated, eyeless, and silent. One after another, same expression, same mouth open in a scream, but never changing shape. They were carved deep. You could fit your whole finger inside the grooves. Petru reached out to touch one and flinched. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head, but I saw his fingers twitch. I knew that reaction. It's the body's instinct when something you touch gives off heat where it shouldn't, or cold that goes straight through to the bone. We made it to the final chamber by accident. I thought it was just another section of the tunnel, but the path opened up into a rounded space, circular, like the inside of a dome. It was the only space that had anything resembling architecture. The ceiling arched, and in the center was a large stone slab, rectangular, stained, surrounded by 13 sets of bones, all arranged the same way, legs crossed, arms out, skull resting on the chest, as if in prayer, but turned inward to face the slab. It was a ritual site. I didn't need anyone to tell me that. You feel it when you stand in the middle of something so carefully designed for a purpose you can't define. The slab had symbols too, same ones from the ledger. Petru took out a piece of tracing paper and tried to rub a copy. I told him to stop. I didn't yell, I just said it plainly, like I would if someone was about to cross a wire that looked dead but wasn't. I didn't like the feeling I had. Not just discomfort. It was awareness. Like something watching. Not from the dark, but from the very walls. From the slab itself. Then we heard the sound. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was a scraping, rhythmic, like stone grinding against stone. We both turned, but there was nothing behind us. The tunnel was clear. I checked again with the flashlight. Then Petru screamed. I turned back and he was on the floor, eyes wide, grabbing at his leg. He said something had pulled him. But there was nothing there. No rope, no hand, just his ankle bleeding, deep gouges as if from claws. I helped him up and we backed toward the entrance. The light was flickering, batteries should have lasted hours more. I reached into the pack for another, but my hand brushed something else. The envelope. The translated page. I pulled it out, half on instinct, and read the last line out loud. Those who misalign the bones of the gate will inherit the scream. And then the lights went out. No flicker. Just complete darkness. And in that dark, there was no silence. There was the scream. Not loud, low, steady, and internal. Like it was coming from inside my own skull. I felt it more than heard it. My teeth ached. My vision throbbed behind my eyes. Petru was breathing heavy, whimpering now, and I couldn't even see him anymore. I dropped to my knees and started moving the bones closest to me, aligning them exactly how they had been. I didn't know why, but I knew I had to. I remembered the positions, the placements. My hands were shaking but I didn't stop. Petru kept asking what I was doing but I told him not to speak. I couldn't explain it, but I knew what would happen if I got it wrong. One by one, I moved the bones back. The scream faded. Not entirely, but enough that I could breathe. My flashlight sputtered back to life, weak but functional. Petru was huddled by the wall, eyes shut tight, repeating something in Romanian, some prayer, I think. I didn't stop him. We didn't go back to the slab. We crawled out of that tunnel without speaking another word. When we reached the surface, the rain had stopped. Just like that. No drizzle, no thunder. Dry. Petru never published a word about it. A week later, he moved to Cebu and left the university entirely. I reached out once. He replied with just 2 words, never again. As for me, I've never gone back to Targu Mures. I resigned from my research position 6 months later. People assumed it was burnout, and maybe that's part of it. But the real reason was simpler. A month after that night, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo, taken in that final chamber. It showed the stone slab, the bones, everything as we left it. Except there was a new pattern. Not 13 bone circles, 14. And the 14th set of bones was arranged the same way I had knelt. Knees on the ground. Hands outstretched. Skull facing inward. And beside it, carved into the slab in fresh lines, were 5 words, "You remembered it wrong." Story number 14. It was late autumn, 1994, when I returned to Šiauliai after spending a few months working odd jobs around Vilnius. I was 29 at the time, no family of my own, and not much in the way of ambition beyond fixing what was broken. That's probably why I found myself back at the local radio station, LRT Šiauliai. It had been shut down for a couple of years, but they needed someone to check the remaining equipment before it was sold off or scrapped. I was a radio technician by trade, not glamorous, but I was good with signals, frequencies, and digging through static to find meaning. The station was nothing more than a 2-story brick building tucked behind a bakery, half forgotten by everyone in the town. There was no working broadcast anymore, everything was quiet. Just a storage unit for rusting equipment and old reels no one cared about. I was paid a bit of money to do a final check, see if anything was salvageable, make sure there were no fire hazards, and lock up. The first couple of nights, I stayed late sorting through dusty boxes, labeling old transmitters, and patching cables. It was routine, tedious. I brought my own small radio scanner with me, just out of habit. Sometimes I'd pick up strange chatter from police bands or foreign radio waves skipping over from Poland, especially when the weather got strange. But that third night, that night was different. It was raining, not that the rain matters, but I remember because of the way it rattled the windowpanes in the back room. I had plugged in one of the older boards just to test for current. To my surprise, the power flickered on, the panel lights blinking like an old heart restarting. I tuned in out of curiosity, mostly static, just white noise like an ocean too far to hear. Then, just after midnight, a voice came through. It wasn't a full sentence at first. Just fragments. Breathing. A throat clearing. I leaned in. The station wasn't broadcasting, the antenna had been taken down years ago. But someone, was transmitting on that frequency. A man's voice, low, calm, but with a slight tremble, like someone speaking in a confessional. "I didn't mean for the first one," he said. I froze. It wasn't just a recording. The signal strength fluctuated like a live transmission, and the background had the hiss of an old microphone, not digital. "The girl in the yellow coat," the voice continued, "she was just standing there, like she was waiting for someone." I scrambled to check the tape deck. Empty. Nothing was playing. I hit record on the board, grabbed a reel tape, and started capturing everything. My hands shook. The voice kept talking, and I sat there, mesmerized and disturbed. I followed her from the park. She kept skipping, humming something. I didn't plan it. I swear. My first instinct was to stop, to shut it off, but something told me not to. Instead, I listened. For 20 minutes, the man recounted, in brutal detail, how he had murdered a child, not in a loud or manic way, but with clinical detachment. He didn't justify it, but he also didn't sound remorseful. He just described. Like he had rehearsed the story in his mind for years and finally needed to speak it. When it ended, the signal cut back to static. I sat there in silence, the tape still rolling until it clicked off. I didn't sleep that night. I took the tape home, locked it in a drawer, and told myself I'd go back in the morning and dismantle the equipment. Maybe it was some pirate transmission. Maybe a sick prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next night, I returned. I brought extra reels. At 12:02 a.m., the signal returned. The second one was easier, the voice began, no introduction. He described a boy this time. Said it happened in 1983. Said the boy liked to collect coins. Said he waited until the rain came, then used it as cover. He knew the boy would run through the alley behind the market, the same place he waited every week. The story was slow, deliberate. The man always used specifics, clothes, places, little habits. This wasn't fiction. I kept recording. I kept listening. Something about his voice, the eerie calmness, the flat emotions, made it impossible to turn away. But it was the details that convinced me this was real. He mentioned streets that existed, houses I'd passed as a kid, and one name that hit me like a sledgehammer, Tomas G., a classmate of mine who vanished in 1984. People said he ran away. His parents moved out a year later. But now this voice was telling me where he had been buried. The North Field, near the broken power station, under a pile of old fencing boards. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I was afraid they'd laugh, or worse, come looking for the tapes and make them disappear. This was post-Soviet Lithuania, our institutions were still unreliable, suspicious of everything. I needed more proof. For 5 nights straight, the signal came back. Always at 12:02. Always a new story. 7 in total. 7 children. Every time, a new detail that matched old rumors or forgotten whispers in the town. By the 6th story, I had already started going to the locations he mentioned. Not alone, I brought a friend once, told him I was scouting places for an audio project. We found something. A buried shoe, half decayed, under a pile of leaves near the railway bend. A child's shoe, yellow, with initials burned on the sole. AG. I knew what I had was real. Too real. So I took the tapes to the police. I expected resistance, maybe laughter. But one of the older officers, a man named Juozas, took one listen and turned pale. He had worked on missing children cases in the 80s. He told me one thing: keep quiet. He said the names matched old files, ones that had been boxed away when nothing came of the leads. He promised to escalate it. I should have stopped there. I should have walked away. But on the 7th night, the voice changed. "I know you're listening," he said. "You've been recording me. I don't mind. I want to be heard." I stiffened in my chair. My palms were sweating. It wasn't like the other nights. This one felt aware. "I see you, in that room. The same chair. Same flickering light. You haven't changed much, have you?" My heart dropped. I looked around. Nothing but old consoles, empty walls. He couldn't see me. There was no camera. No feedback monitor. It had to be a trick. "You were 13 when you saw me with the boy near the river," he continued. "Do you remember?" A memory came back so hard I nearly fell out of the chair. There had been a moment, in '82, a boy playing with a stranger. I'd been fishing with my uncle. I remembered the man's coat, green, frayed. I had thought nothing of it. It had faded away with time. Until now. "I looked at you, but you didn't say anything," the voice said. "That makes you part of it, doesn't it?" I ripped the headphones off. The signal kept going. I yanked the plug from the board. Silence. Just the sound of my own heartbeat. I didn't go back the next night. 2 days later, Officer Juozas came to my apartment. Said they'd dug up a site near the old switching station. Human remains. Several small skeletons. They matched ages, clothing, dental records, some confirmed, some pending. He asked for the last tape. I told him I didn't record the final one. I had stopped. Lied through my teeth. I wasn't sure if I was protecting myself or something else. The station was sealed off not long after. Officially, it was deemed a fire hazard. They boarded the windows, cut the power. I never went near it again. A man was never arrested. They never found a suspect. Juozas later told me, off the record, that some of the case files had been tampered with back in the 80s. Witness statements erased. Photographs gone. He suspected someone higher up had protected the killer. Maybe he was one of their own. Maybe that's why he never gave his name. I moved out of Shaolei within a year. Changed my job. Started repairing car radios. Quieter life. No more midnight shifts. But I kept the tapes, all 6, in a box under my bed. I listened to them once more, years later. They still made my skin crawl. Not just because of the content, but because the voice changed by the 6th tape. It got clearer. Stronger. Like he was getting closer. I haven't listened to them since. Sometimes I wonder if that last message, the one where he spoke to me directly, was real. Or if my mind, rattled by everything, made it up to punish myself for what I didn't remember. Or maybe, it was real. And he really did see me back then. Either way, I've never gone fishing again. Story number 15. It was the first time in 40 years I'd let the barrels sit untouched during harvest week. I couldn't bring myself to step into the cellar. Not after what happened to Julian. My boy, my only child. He drowned just a few hundred meters from the vineyard, face down in a ditch that had overflowed after a sudden storm. The rain had come quickly, but not unusually so. This was bone, and autumn always brought surprise downpours. But that day felt off. I didn't say anything at the time because it sounded ridiculous even to me. Julian was 34. Strong. Smart. Passionate about the vineyard. He loved winemaking more than I ever did. I had planned to hand everything over to him by next spring. He had vision, ideas for organic growing, boutique blends, new exports. Now it's all gone. My wife had died years ago, and now with Julian gone, I found myself waking up in silence, eating in silence, and staring out at rows of vines that no longer had meaning. The police called it an accident. Slipped while inspecting the irrigation line, they said. Water levels rose quickly, perhaps he hit his head on the stone edge. But I had walked that ditch for years. There were no sharp drops, no slick moss that could do that. Something didn't add up. But again, what would I say? That I had a bad feeling. That the vineyard had gone quiet in a way I couldn't explain. A week after the funeral, I received a package at the front gate. No note, no sender. A single bottle of wine, uncorked, but sealed tight with wax. I recognized the glass, it was my own. A bottle from our 1998 vintage. But I hadn't produced that shape in nearly 2 decades. When I turned it in my hands, I saw something odd. Etched across the surface, where the label should have been, were words I hadn't seen in years. Not alone. Behind the vines. That was the last thing Julian ever said to me. 3 days before his death, while we were inspecting the west fence line. I joked about the deer creeping in again, and he had stared off toward the trees and whispered those words. I had laughed it off at the time, figured he was being poetic or maybe referring to a fox he'd spotted. But now those words were burned into glass. And I hadn't told anyone about them. Not the police. Not my friend Armand. No one. I didn't drink the wine. I placed the bottle on the kitchen counter and just stared at it for days. Every time I passed it, I felt a pull in my chest. Like it was asking me to do something. Or warning me. I didn't sleep much that week. Couldn't. I kept replaying his last week, his distant eyes, the way he kept walking off alone during harvest prep, his insistence on double-checking the irrigation channels by himself. He was worried about something. I just hadn't taken it seriously. 2 weeks later, another bottle arrived. Same bottle type. No note. This one had a 2000 vintage stamp, a year we never bottled due to a bad yield. Etched into the glass this time, cellar key. East wall. Old brick. I went straight to the cellar that night. I didn't want to wait, didn't even think to question it. I brought a hammer and chisel, walked along the east wall, tapping bricks like I was some fool in a detective novel. And then, hollow. One brick echoed differently. I chipped it free and found a rusted iron key wrapped in oilcloth. I never knew that compartment existed. I used the key on the old cellar door that had been locked since before I inherited the vineyard from my father. I always assumed it was just a sealed storage room. Inside was dark, thick with dust. Old ledgers, crates, forgotten tools, and something else. Julian's notebook. It was weather-worn but intact. Inside were sketches of the vineyard, notes about soil pH, sunlight angles, the usual. But near the back, things changed. Doodles of strange symbols. Diagrams of underground tunnels. And then pages and pages filled with the same line, "They watch when it rains." I flipped faster, disturbed. Near the end, he had listed dates. All stormy days. Next to them were names. Locals. Farmhands. 2 tourists from 5 years ago. A supplier. I remembered most of them. They had all gone missing, unexplained disappearances the town had whispered about for years. Julian had been keeping track. He had seen something. Something he hadn't told me. I sat there for hours in that dark room, reading and rereading his notes. He believed there were things, people, or something else, living under the vineyard. Hiding behind the vines. Watching through the rain. Taking people. He hadn't figured out how or why, only that it always happened during storms. And then he must have gotten too close. Maybe he saw them. Maybe he tried to stop them. And they got him too. I wanted to believe it was grief. That I was losing my mind. But those bottles, etched with his exact words, kept arriving. Over the next few months, I received 3 more. Each with messages that built on each other, below the roots. Don't till near the old shed. They need rain. And silence. I stopped going outside when it rained. Just sat by the window, bottle in hand, watching. Listening. One stormy night in January, I heard movement in the vineyard. Not just branches in the wind, footsteps. Crunching wet soil. At first I thought it was a trespasser. I grabbed my flashlight, went out with my coat, and followed the sound. My boots sunk into the mud. I saw impressions in the dirt. Bare feet. Human-sized. But no one in sight. Then I saw light, faint and blue, flickering from beneath the old tool shed. I had never seen that before. I approached slowly, but the light blinked out as soon as I got close. I tried the door. Locked. I went back inside, waited for morning. When I checked again in daylight, there were no footprints. No sign I'd even been there. Only the old boards of the shed, swollen with damp. I considered burning the whole thing down. But I didn't. Instead, I sealed the cellar. Stopped production entirely. I told the co-op I was retiring early. Let the weeds grow. I couldn't touch the soil anymore. Months passed. No more bottles. The silence made it worse. Every time it rained, I felt them near. Not ghosts, I'm not a fool. I don't believe in the afterlife. But something was in that ground. Something Julian found. Something that didn't want to be seen. A year after his death, on the exact same date, the final bottle arrived. This one was different. No vintage stamp. No label. Just a thick black bottle, heavier than the rest. Etched with 2 words, "It's done." I opened it. It smelled nothing like wine. Metallic. Like rust and something sour underneath. I poured it down the sink without thinking. That night, I dreamed of Julian. He was standing in the vineyard, but the vines were all dead. Blackened. Wilted. The sky was dry. No rain. He smiled, for the first time in any dream, and then turned his back and walked away. I don't know what he did. Whether he stopped something or joined it. Whether he sacrificed himself or bought me time. But after that night, the noises stopped. The bottles stopped. The vineyard never grew properly again. I sold the land 3 years later to a hotel group. They tore out the vines, built over the fields. Turned it into a spa retreat. Sometimes I wonder if the ground still remembers. If they're just waiting for the right kind of rain. I haven't told anyone this until now. Maybe you'll think I'm mad. Maybe I am. But every time I open a bottle of wine, I run my fingers over the glass. Just to make sure the message isn't meant for me. Not yet. Story number 16. It started when I was 16. We had just moved to Vaduz from Scone. My dad got a promotion, and the new place was bigger, older, and honestly kind of creepy. But we didn't really have a say. My parents were excited, and I was told to be grateful. It was a 3-story house, not some haunted mansion or anything like that, just an old structure built sometime in the 60s. The room I picked was on the 2nd floor, corner room. It had a large window that looked out over the neighbor's hedge. That window became my obsession. It started leaking during the first rain we had that October. I remember waking up at around 3 a.m. because I heard dripping. When I turned on the lamp, there was a wet patch under the window, dark and shiny. I thought maybe I had left the window cracked, but it was shut tight. I told my dad the next morning, and he said he'd seal it up when he got home from work. He didn't. He forgot. And then it rained again the next week. The next time, the leak was worse. The water had spread in a strange pattern along the base of the window frame. I went to wipe it off, but I stopped when I noticed something weird. The stain looked like a handprint. Not a full one, just the curve of a palm and the tips of some fingers, like someone had pressed their hand lightly against the glass from the inside. I stared at it for a long time. I even tried to recreate it with my own hand, but it didn't match. Mine was smaller, and besides, the mark had already dried oddly into the grain of the wall. When I told my parents, they exchanged that look. The "teenagers are so dramatic" look. My mom just said, "The wall is old, the moisture probably brings out weird shapes." Dad promised again to seal it up. He didn't. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then in early November, we had back-to-back storms. I was up late doing homework when the first one hit. The power flickered, and I felt something, just this sudden pull to look at the window. It was leaking again. The water was trickling down steadily now, not dripping but flowing slowly like a melting candle. I got up to grab a towel and stopped cold. There were more stains. Not just the handprint this time. They looked like lines, thin, almost deliberate strokes where the water had flowed. But they weren't random. They curved. Intersected. Like someone was drawing on the wall using rainwater. I stood there staring, heart pounding, not knowing what I was looking at. It looked intentional, but impossible. I backed away, slowly, and left the room to sleep on the couch downstairs. The next morning, the stains were mostly gone. Faded into the wallpaper like nothing had happened. I asked my mom to come up and look, but there wasn't much left to see. Just some discoloration. She said, "You probably dreamt it." I didn't argue. But it kept happening. Every time it rained, only during the rain, the marks would reappear. And each time, they got more detailed. The handprints were more defined, like whoever was making them was trying harder. The lines, though, they began to form shapes. Arrows, boxes, and paths. Like a crude map. I started sketching them in my notebook whenever they showed up. I'd stay up through the storms, waiting with a pen and pad like some obsessed cartographer. I tried comparing it to our neighborhood map, but it didn't match any street I knew. Then something changed. One night in late November, I noticed something new at the center of the stains, a small, jagged X. Not in the classic treasure map style, just two intersecting lines near the baseboard, like it was marking something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at that X. It felt personal now, like someone wanted me to do something. Not just observe, but act. The next morning, I brought a small knife from the kitchen. I waited until everyone left the house and then went upstairs. I knelt down near the X, pressed the knife lightly into the wooden floor, and twisted. The blade sunk in too easily. The wood cracked slightly, and I pulled up a piece. Beneath it, packed tightly, was something soft and blackened. A cloth of some sort, wrapped in plastic. I pulled it out slowly, hands shaking. Inside was a small, water-damaged notebook. It was wrapped in 2 layers of faded plastic, yellowed and brittle. I peeled it open and flipped to the first page. The ink was mostly smudged, but the name Anna Keller was still legible. I didn't recognize it. The entries were dated from 1969. As I read more, my throat tightened. Anna had lived in this house. She was 15. The entries were disjointed, scared. She wrote about a man her mother had started dating. He watches me, she wrote. He comes into my room when Mom is asleep. One page had only one sentence: I don't think I'll wake up if he comes again. I remember dropping the notebook and just sitting there, heart racing. My stomach turned. I felt cold, sick, and suddenly unsafe in my own room. I read every page that still had ink. The last entry was dated July 4, 1969. It ended mid-sentence: he told me not to tell anyone, or, that was it. I didn't know what to do. I was 16. Who was I supposed to tell? My parents already thought I was making things up. And this was decades ago. What proof did I even have? A notebook that might have been faked. But I kept it. I tucked it into my backpack and hid it at school, just in case. That weekend, I decided to try matching the map again. I traced the stain patterns from my notes onto a real paper map. Nothing in Vaduz fit exactly. But something clicked when I noticed the curvature of the trails. They didn't follow streets. They followed elevation, like someone moving across hills. There's a wooded trail near our place. It's rarely used, mostly overgrown, and runs along the back of several properties, including ours. The lines matched that path. And the X fell near an area I'd always avoided, a collapsed old tool shed at the edge of the woods. I waited for the next rainy evening. It came 2 days later. I put on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and told my parents I was sleeping over at Leonie's place. Then I slipped out the back and followed the path. It took me 30 minutes to find the shed. It was half swallowed by moss and tilted dangerously to one side. The door was off its hinges. I stepped inside and instantly regretted it. The air was heavy. Not with smell, but something worse, like pressure. The floor was soft. Muddy from the rain, but something about the ground felt wrong. Like it had been disturbed. I dug with my hands. It took hours. I lost track of time. My fingers bled. My knees were soaked. But I didn't stop until I hit something solid. A piece of old canvas. I pulled it aside and found bones. A small, broken skeleton wrapped in a rotted blanket. I screamed and stumbled back, scraping my arm on a nail. I ran. I didn't stop until I got to the main road, flagged down a car, and sobbed to a stranger about what I'd found. The police came. The area was taped off. Forensic teams arrived the next morning. It took weeks, but they confirmed it. The remains were those of a teenage girl. The name matched the notebook, Anna Keller. She had gone missing in 1969, but no formal investigation had ever been opened. Her mother claimed she ran away. No one asked further. They questioned my parents, our neighbors, the former owners of the house. Nothing concrete turned up about the man Anna had written about. He was never named. He had vanished, or maybe changed his name. Maybe he died decades ago. No one could say. They let us keep the house. My parents insisted everything was fine now that the truth was out. But I moved into the guest room. I never stepped foot in my old room again. The stains never returned. We painted over the wall, but even then, I avoided looking at that corner. I kept the notebook. I don't know why. Maybe I felt like I owed her. Like I was the only one who listened, even after all those years. I still think about her. About how she must have felt, scared and ignored, just a girl trying to be heard. And I think about the rain, how it became her voice. Her way of refusing to disappear. I don't know what made her choose me. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was timing. Or maybe it was just that I saw her handprint when no one else did. But I know this, the window doesn't weep anymore. And I still don't sleep well when it rains. Story number 17. I was never much of a dog person, to be honest. Not that I disliked them, I just never thought I needed one. But after my husband died in '91 and my daughter moved to Auckland for university, the house got too quiet. Too empty. It was my sister who suggested I get a dog. It'll give you a reason to get out of bed in the morning, she said. So I adopted a scruffy mutt from the shelter and named him Rollo, after a biscuit brand I liked as a child. Rollo was a good boy. Loyal, quiet, didn't bark unless there was truly something to bark at. He'd sit by the door when it rained, watching the water roll down the glass like he understood something I didn't. I had a small patch of yard out back, overgrown in parts but fenced in enough for him to run around. It was one of those wet evenings in late September of '93 when everything began. It had been raining for hours, that annoying drizzle that gets under your collar. I had just finished my tea and was about to settle in for the evening news when Rollo started whining at the back door. Not barking, whining. The kind of sound he only made when he was agitated. I opened the door, expecting him to do his business and come back in, but he shot straight into the yard like something had grabbed his attention. I watched from the kitchen window as he began digging furiously near the far corner of the garden. I'd never seen him like that. I went out after a few minutes to call him in, but he growled when I got close. That was new. His snout was already covered in mud, and something white had started to show through the soil. Rollo! I shouted. He backed off slightly, tail low, ears flattened. I crouched and brushed some of the dirt away with my hands. What I saw made my throat close up. It was a human jawbone. Still had a molar in it. At first, I told myself it had to be from an animal, maybe a pig, or a large dog. But I'd grown up on a farm. I knew the difference. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. I went back inside and called the local police station. They came quickly, probably because there wasn't much else happening in Rotorua that night. 2 officers, both looked like they were barely out of school. They marked off the area, told me not to touch anything else, and said they'd send forensics in the morning. One of them tried to reassure me. Might be nothing. People bury all kinds of things in their yards, he said. I nodded but didn't answer. By the next day, my backyard was crawling with people. Police, crime scene analysts, a reporter from the local paper. They pulled out more than just the jawbone. Ribs. A cracked skull. Pieces of fabric. A shoe. The shoe looked old. Worn. Like something from the '70s. I didn't get much sleep that week. They asked me all the usual questions. How long had I lived there? Did I know anything about the previous owners? Had I ever dug up the yard before? I'd bought the house in 1986. A retired couple owned it before me. Nice folks. Moved to Christchurch to be closer to their kids. Nothing strange about them at all. At least, not that I knew. The media started showing up more often after a few days. My phone rang constantly. A few people from the neighborhood stopped by pretending to bring food or check on me, but I could see it in their eyes, they were curious. Hoping for something sensational. And then the first letter came. No envelope. Just a folded piece of paper shoved through my mail slot. The paper was damp, the ink slightly smudged, but legible. It said, "Put it back. You weren't meant to find it." No signature. No return address. I laughed at first. Nervous, hollow laughter. Probably a prank, I told myself. People are sick like that. I threw it away and tried to forget it. 2 nights later, another one arrived. Same type of paper. Same smeared ink. This one said, "They will not rest if you let them dig." That one got under my skin. I brought the note to the police the next morning. The officer took it, said they'd look into it, but I could tell by his tone that he didn't think it was serious. Maybe he thought I wrote it myself for attention. Things got worse. Rollo started barking at night. Not just barking, growling, whining, then hiding under the kitchen table. Always at the same time, around 2:30 a.m. I tried calming him, but his eyes would dart toward the back window, every single time. Like he saw something I couldn't. I started hearing noises too. Soft ones. A scrape here. A creak there. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, or maybe my nerves playing tricks. But I'd lived in that house for years. I knew its sounds. These were new. And the dreams. I don't usually dream. Or if I do, I don't remember them. But suddenly I was waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, heart racing. Always the same image, a woman, soaking wet, standing at the foot of my bed. No eyes. Just dark holes where they should be. The third note came a week after the second. It said, "Do not let them name her. Leave it buried." That was the day the forensic team identified the bones. A young woman. Age estimate between 20 and 30. Likely buried in the early 1970s. No official missing persons matched yet, but they had a few leads. One of the officers told me they were looking into a woman who'd vanished from a commune just outside of town in '72. A group that was known to be secretive and eventually shut down by the government. I tried not to think about it. But something inside me felt twisted, like I'd disturbed something that wanted to stay hidden. Then I got the fourth note. This one was different. It was typed, not handwritten. And it came in an envelope. No address, just my name. Inside, a single sentence. "The woman who lived here before you lied." It felt like ice down my spine. I tracked down the old owners, the Bennetts, through the real estate agent who had handled the sale. I called them. Mr. Bennett answered. He was polite but hesitant when I brought up the discovery in my yard. "We didn't know anything about that," he said. "We only used that corner of the garden for compost." I asked him again. Slower this time. He paused, and then said, "Look, Mrs. Collier, we're very old now. We don't want any trouble. Please don't call again." And he hung up. That night, the police called me. They'd received a tip, an anonymous one. It said the woman in the garden was named Miriam Ellis. She'd been part of a spiritual group that lived in Rotorua briefly before dispersing in the mid-70s. She was last seen alive in 1973. They never found records of her leaving New Zealand. It all started making a kind of awful sense. The Bennetts bought the house in 1974, just after the commune dissolved. Maybe they knew something. Maybe they didn't. But someone did. The fifth and final note came 2 days later. I still remember the weight of it in my hands, heavier than paper should feel. It was wrapped around a small object. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a tooth. Human. The note just said, "You woke her up." That night I didn't sleep. Neither did Rollo. He paced the house, whining softly. I sat at the kitchen table, every light on, waiting for something. I didn't know what. At 3:07 a.m., the power went out. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up on the kitchen floor around dawn. The lights were back on. Everything seemed normal. But there was mud on the floor, leading from the back door to the hallway. I checked the door. Locked from the inside. That morning, I packed a bag and checked into a motel. I never went back. The house sold a few months later to a young couple from Wellington. I never told them about the notes. The police never found the sender. They identified the remains as Miriam Ellis based on dental records. The case is technically still open, though no one's been arrested. The Bennetts moved to a nursing home shortly after. I still have Rollo. He's old now, nearly blind. But he's calm again. Peaceful. Sometimes, when it rains, I wonder if I should have done things differently. Maybe I should have kept quiet. Left the bones where they were. Maybe there are things we're not meant to uncover. Maybe some stories are meant to stay buried. But I couldn't ignore her. No one else had listened. She screamed through my dog's paws. She cried through the dirt. And maybe, just maybe, she's finally at rest. Story number 18. I still remember the night like it just happened. It was the summer of 1986 in Mariefred, and I had taken the boat out earlier than usual because I wanted to beat the storm I'd seen creeping across the lake earlier in the afternoon. I fish for a living, nothing glamorous, just honest work, and I've always preferred being alone with the water. But that night changed the way I look at silence forever. I had just pulled my boat up onto the dock and was wheeling my small crate of catch toward the van when I noticed something off to my right. There's an old stone bridge not far from the docks, nothing special, just a way over the narrow end of the inlet. But that night, there was a car under it. Or, more accurately, part of a car. The rear half stuck out from the water like a dying fish. Headlights dimmed but still on, and the engine, strangely enough, was humming low, like it was trying to keep itself alive. I stood there for a minute, just watching it. I remember thinking it didn't make sense. If it had just gone off the bridge, I would have heard it. The splash, the crash, something. But there'd been nothing. No noise. Just that steady rain and the hum of the engine echoing slightly off the stone. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, pushed me forward. I put the crate in the van and jogged over, slipping slightly in the wet gravel. The bridge was only about a meter or so above the waterline, and from there I could see the front of the car submerged completely. No movement inside, no thrashing, no sign of panic. I squatted near the edge and yelled, "Hello? Anyone in there?" My voice came back to me dull and muffled. No answer. I went around to the embankment and slid down to the water's edge. The current here wasn't too strong, nothing like the main lake, but deep enough that the car's front end had sunk cleanly in. I waded in, maybe knee-deep, trying to get closer. I could see the driver's window was halfway down. I angled my body and peered in. No one. No driver, no passenger, just empty seats and water slowly pooling in the footwell. And then I saw it, on the dashboard. A sheet of paper, soaked around the edges but clinging desperately to the surface. It was a child's drawing. Crayon or marker, something bright. I leaned closer. It showed a car, probably this car, on a bridge. But not just that. There was a stick figure inside the car, and another one outside, standing on the bridge looking down. And next to the person on the bridge, there was something else. A scribbled black shape. Not a person. Not an animal. Just, something. I felt a chill, not from the rain. This wasn't a kid's art project. There was a desperate tone to it, like whoever drew it wanted to tell me something. I reached in to grab it, carefully trying not to damage it further, when I heard something above. Footsteps. Heavy ones, fast, running across the bridge overhead. I froze. The bridge is old, but you can still hear when someone walks on it, especially when it's wet. I looked up but couldn't see anything through the angle. I climbed out of the water, fast, half stumbling, and dashed up the embankment to get on the road. Nothing. No one there. Just the wind pushing rain sideways across the pavement. I stood there for a second, heart pounding. Then I heard something again, softer this time, like whispering. Not words I could understand, just murmurs. I looked around, confused, and then it stopped. Just like that. Silence again. I wasn't about to leave that car in the water. I may be a fisherman, but I know when something's wrong, and that whole scene screamed wrong. I called the local police from the payphone near the harbor store. By the time they arrived, the rain had slowed to a mist, but the car was still running, engine grumbling stubbornly under the water. They pulled the car out using a tow truck. No license plates, someone had removed them. No registration inside either. Just that drawing. I handed it over to the officer, and I'll never forget his expression. He didn't say anything, just studied it and slipped it into a plastic sleeve like it was evidence. 2 days later, they called me in for questioning. They'd run the car's VIN. The vehicle had been reported stolen in 1983, 3 years earlier, from a town about 100 kilometers west. It was owned by a woman named Anika Norgren. She disappeared with her 7-year-old son on the same day. Her husband, apparently, was suspected but never charged. The case went cold. They showed me a photo of her. I didn't recognize her. Then they showed me a school photo of her son. That hit harder. Because the face looked like the one in the drawing, same hair, same smile, same sad eyes. I asked where they found the photo, and the detective said it came from a box they recovered from the trunk. A box full of drawings. Every single one was like the first, simple, chaotic, and all showing that same shadowy figure near the bridge. I asked if they found any bodies. He said no. Not in the car. Not in the water. Nothing. But there was more. They'd gone back to the bridge, combed the surrounding land, and found a shallow grave about 50 meters upstream. Inside were bone fragments, a woman's locket, and 2 smaller objects, a child's shoe and a broken crayon. DNA testing later confirmed they were Anika and her son. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Mystery solved. But then I found out something else. The bridge, that spot where the car was found, had its own history. It wasn't publicized, but the locals knew. Back in the 1950s, a man had thrown himself off that bridge after murdering his own family. He believed there was something in the water whispering to him, promising peace if he returned the children. That phrase stuck with me. Returned the children. The whispers I heard that night, were they the same ones? I started having dreams after that. Always raining, always near the bridge. In the dreams, I'm walking alone, and there's a boy standing at the edge, holding out a drawing. I try to reach him, but the water keeps rising, faster and faster, until I wake up gasping. A few months later, I went back. I don't know why, closure, maybe. The bridge looked the same, like nothing ever happened. But when I got close, I noticed something carved into the underside of the stone, something only visible if you were in the water like I was that night. It said, "Not drowned. Taken." That shook me harder than I care to admit. Because it wasn't a warning. It was a statement. I stopped fishing near the bridge after that. Hell, I stopped going out during storms altogether. Something about that night made me feel like I'd trespassed on a secret I wasn't meant to uncover. People ask me now if I believe in ghosts, or demons, or curses. I tell them I don't know. But I believe in stories. I believe that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. And sometimes, the dead need a witness. Story number 19. I was a nurse at St. Duthak's Hospital in Perth back in 2002. It was a quiet place, mostly handling general care, post-op recovery, and the occasional overnight emergency. I'd been working the night shift for almost 4 years by then, used to the silence, the pacing of the halls, and the routine that came with it. Most nights were uneventful. You stocked supplies, checked vitals, maybe admitted a drunk or two. But there was one night I'll never forget. Not because it was frightening in the theatrical way horror movies try to be, but because it felt wrong, in my bones, in my gut, in the air I breathed. It was real. It was a Thursday. I remember because I was looking forward to the weekend off and had a bottle of wine waiting at home. The shift started like any other. I was on with Leslie, a kind but quiet woman in her late 50s who had seen her fair share of hospital deaths and never seemed fazed. We had 2 post-ops in Ward A and a fractured hip in B. It was unusually calm. Around midnight, Leslie went to make tea while I handled rounds. Nothing out of place. I just sat down at the nurse's station with a biscuit when the emergency phone rang. That was rare. That phone was a direct line used only for internal hospital emergencies, usually cardiac codes or incoming trauma patients. I picked it up, expecting a panicked doctor or maybe a security call. "This is room 19, a voice said. Female, low, calm. It didn't register at first. I looked down at the sheet taped next to the phone. Room 19 had been closed for years. "I'm sorry, who is this?" I asked, instinctively writing down the time. 12:08 a.m., I'm in room 19. He killed me. He's still here. I froze. The line crackled for a second, then went dead. I held the phone to my ear for a moment, unsure whether to laugh it off or feel something heavier. Room 19 had been sealed after the 1998 flood. That fire in the electrical system, you might have heard about it. A storm flooded the lower wing, shorted the main grid, and something sparked in the old wiring. That part of the hospital was condemned. Officially, no one was allowed past the double doors without clearance. The doors were padlocked and marked restricted access. Still, I stood up and walked to the junction that connected the active wings to the old hallway. It was purely instinct. Nothing rational. I didn't even tell Leslie, I figured it was probably a prank or a crossed line. But as I approached the double doors, I saw something that made my skin crawl. The padlock was unlatched. Not broken, just hanging. Like someone had unlocked it and gently placed it back in the loop. I pushed the door open, half expecting to be hit with the smell of mold or burnt plastic. But nothing hit me. The air was stale, yes, but still. Too still. I walked slowly down the hall, checking the room numbers. 14. 15. I hesitated at 18. The next door, on the left, was slightly ajar. Room 19. I told myself not to open it. That I should go back, get Leslie, maybe report it. But I didn't. I nudged it open with the tip of my shoe and looked inside. It was empty. No bed, no chairs, no machines. Just a bare room with flaking paint and a single overhead bulb that was somehow still working. The light hummed softly, casting a dull glow on the floor. But the odd thing, the disturbing thing, was the smell. Coppery. Faint, but unmistakable. Blood. I stepped in. That's when I saw the phone. A wall-mounted unit, like the ones we used before the portable intercoms. It was hanging off the hook. I walked over and lifted it, listening. Dead. Not even static. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye on the far wall. There were marks, scratches, shallow but deliberate. Not random like a patient in distress. These were aligned. I counted them before I realized what they were, tallies. Dozens of them, etched into the plaster. I backed out, heart thudding, finally feeling the creep of adrenaline. This was wrong. I shouldn't be here. And then, just as I stepped into the hall, I heard a sound that still makes my stomach drop. Footsteps. Not behind me, in front. Down the hallway, past the bend, coming closer. Slow, heavy, steady. I didn't wait to see who or what was coming. I turned and walked quickly back toward the double doors. I didn't run, I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I stayed calm, whatever was back there wouldn't follow. When I reached the nurse's station, Leslie looked up and frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. I must have been pale. I told her someone had prank-called the emergency line, claimed to be in room 19. She frowned deeper when I said the lock was undone. "That whole wing's supposed to be sealed," she muttered. She followed me back to the doors. The padlock was back in place, latched this time. That shook me. I hadn't relocked it. I know I hadn't. Leslie rattled it, then gave me a look. "You sure it was unlocked?" I just nodded. We logged the incident, called maintenance in the morning, and I went home, trying to convince myself it was just some crossed line, maybe a delay in call routing. I didn't sleep much. 3 days later, I was called into the administrator's office. They'd reviewed the call logs from that night. There was indeed a call made to the emergency line at 12:08 a.m. from a hardline extension, room 19. I asked how that was possible. The admin just looked uncomfortable and said the line must have glitched, maybe a mislabel. But I knew. I knew. A week after that, a construction team went into the sealed wing for inspection. One of the workers, a young guy named Callum, found something lodged behind the old cabinet bolted to the wall in room 19. It was a small ID badge. Cracked, rusted. The name on it was Annette Glover. She was a nurse who'd worked night shift back in the 80s. Her file showed she'd gone missing in 1984, last seen at St. Duthax. No foul play suspected at the time. They thought she'd run off with a boyfriend. Her badge was the only thing they found. No remains. No other belongings. Nothing to prove she'd died there, only that she'd once worked there, and that something of hers had remained in a room no one had entered in years. After that discovery, the hallway was permanently sealed with a metal barrier. They poured concrete over the floor of room 19. No one talked about it officially, but I heard rumors that they found blood traces soaked deep into the floorboards. Old. Human. I don't work there anymore. I transferred the year after, then left nursing altogether. Not because of what I saw, but because I heard her. Sometimes I still hear her. In dreams. In those moments just before I fall asleep. That calm, steady voice. "This is room 19. He killed me. He's still here.
Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.